Good afternoon and welcome to ITV's results coverage of the 2021 Senedd elections. Counting is underway across Wales and our reporters will bring you all the latest as this unprecedented campaign reaches its conclusion.
This map will soon start reflecting the way that you voted. I'll be crunching the numbers and explaining what it means.
And I'm here in the Senedd with all the political reaction as the next Welsh Parliament begins to take shape.
Hello and a very warm welcome to ITV Cymru Wales's results programme for the Senedd elections 2021. We are here all afternoon pretty much with reporters across the country in every region telling us what's happening in their patch. We will try to explain to you what the results are as they come in and why they matter. You can see in the bottom left of your screen a live total number of seats for each of the main parties, Labour, Conservatives and Plaid Cymru first, and then the grey box is a summary of the number of seats other parties have. So keep an eye on that. Stay with us for the next 3 hours. I know you may well have been tuning in for the likes of Judge Rhondda, but potentially Adrian and I may just deliver you equal amounts of drama this afternoon. So let's go to Adrian now to bring us up to speed on exactly where we have reached so far. Give us a little reminder.
I'm not committing to that under oath, by the way. We are poised, Andrea, at an extremely tense and I would genuinely say this exciting moment in the election because the votes were counted. The votes we voted. That's the word I'm grasping for. We voted last night. That all finished at 10 o'clock. The votes have been counted since this morning. Some of the results are getting close. One of them is in. And to give you the overall sense of it, I've been using this phrase, for Wales, don't see England, because pretty much every other bit of election coverage you're going to see and read from across the UK will talk about a Conservative resurgence and a Labour struggling. Here in Wales, that doesn't look like it's going to be the case. More on that throughout the programme, no doubt, as we find out. This is how we're going to help you through all this. This gargantuan screen.
Some people may have been tuning in for game shows this afternoon. Well, there's one kind of right here, isn't there?
It's the Wheel of Fortune. I'm showing my age now. Let me talk you through this map. Well, it is a map to begin with. So do you remember when you voted? You had two votes, two ballot papers for this. So you voted for your Senedd member. So you chose a person belonging to a party, or it could have been an independent. The second one, you were voting for a party on what's called the regional list. Now, on the regional list, all those votes get added up and divided in a complicated way that we can't pretend to understand, but will deliver some results. So what we're looking at here, these are the constituencies, the local areas where you live. So if you live in, say, Isloyn, you might be thinking about being in Blackwood. Wrexham, it says exactly what it does exactly what it says on the tin. But those are your very local areas. These boxes here, they represent the regions: North, Mid and West, South West, South Central, South Wales East. There'll be 4 members each of that. So every one of us gets 5 members as a result of this process. Over the course of the next few hours, however long it's going to take, we'll fill up these 2 bits. And then into the Wheel of Fortune, which is actually the Senedd chamber. We've got one result, which looks a bit sad. It's not. It's exciting, and I'll explain why. There are 60 Senedd members, so we've drawn the line here, slap bang in the middle at 30. 30 is the important figure for everyone. Actually, they'd much prefer to get to 31. That's highly unlikely. It's never happened in the whole history of the Senedd. But all of the parties will want to fill these up to get as close as they can to that. But we can. Should we look at the one? This little bit of little sliver of blue represents Montgomeryshire, which is the rural Mid Wales seat, Newtown and Welshpool, Llanidloes, places like that. We expected it to be a Conservative win. A Conservative gain. It is. The Senedd member Russell George has kept it with, though, a hefty majority. So they'll be very pleased with that because it does look as though they're going to, as a party, are going to struggle throughout the rest of the day's results. So they will be pleased with Montgomeryshire. I should say that better brains than I have looked at this and have realised that compared to what our polls showed, the Conservative result is a bit down, and particularly the big losers here in this seat might be the Lib Dems. It's too early to draw out too much from one result, but one result.
So as you say, that was expected. It was expected to be a Conservative hold, a safe seat. Russell George there since 2011, I think. But when you were talking about the regional seats just now, they might not declare till a lot later on.
That's right. So because each region, if we can go back to the big map, each region, so Montgomeryshire is in Mid and West Wales. That's made up of several different constituencies. What they'll do is they wait till all of the constituencies in that region have voted. Then they'll start counting the regional votes that people have cast. So we could be looking at very late this evening. I'm not going to say it's going to go.
Well, we're back on at 9 p.m. tonight, aren't we? We might have some of them by then, you never know.
Just as well, isn't it? Yeah, so it could be quite late. I hope that they'll all want to get on with it and just count as much as they can. But it's an unusual election because of COVID and social distancing. Everything's changed in terms of the way they've campaigned and the way the parties have canvassed, but also in terms of the way that they've been counted.
Again, usually, of course, we're doing this through the night, aren't we? But this afternoon we have the pleasure of doing it for 3 hours in the afternoon. So it's slightly more pleasant for us, isn't it, anyway?
It is. It's unusual, but at least we should still be standing at the end of it.
Yeah. So we've got one seat in, as you say, that slither of blue on the Wheel of Fortune there, which represents the Senedd chamber. There'll be many more coming in throughout this afternoon. One seat that we think may be declaring imminently, or might be one of the next to declare in the next half an hour or so, is the Rhondda. Now, that's a particularly interesting seat for us this afternoon. In 2016, it was the only one to change hands, and it went to Plaid Cymru. Leanne Wood having a momentous victory there. We can see some live shots of the count in Tylerstown in the Rhondda going on as we speak, so live shots from the Rhondda there. Interestingly, Labour and senior Labour figures are declaring victory here, but I must emphasise that we do not have a declaration as yet. But we can talk to Rob Osborne, who is at our counts for us in Cardiff and looking at the Rhondda count very carefully as well. Rob, what are we hearing at the moment? Are you expecting, what are you hearing on the ground? Are we expecting any results in the next few minutes or next half an hour or so?
No, not in the next few minutes, half an hour or so, I'll tell you that. But let me explain where I am and why we're going to talk about the Rhondda. So I am in Cardiff. This is the seat of the First Minister and the Health Minister, among others. We expect them to be returned, and we're counting here the voters' verdicts. That's another Judge Rhondda reference for you. But I'm also keeping an eye on the Rhondda in this South Wales Central region. And as you say, and I must put this in health warnings and caveats and all the rest of it, but Labour are confident they have retaken the Rhondda. Now, what does that mean? Well, it would mean that Leanne Wood has lost her seat. That is a big story. And Leanne Wood is a prominent figure here in Wales, the former leader of Plaid Cymru, a famous victory for the party back in 2016. The Rhondda is the jewel in the crown, if you like, for both Labour and Plaid Cymru, because it represents different things. For Labour, it represents their traditional post-industrial areas, which they have practically always represented, and for Plaid Cymru, it represents a breakthrough. So if it is true that Leanne Wood has lost her seat, and I emphasise again, if, that would be extremely disappointing for Plaid Cymru and obviously for Leanne Wood. Now, the votes are being counted. We hopefully will get the result while we're on air sometime later this afternoon.
Rob, for now, thank you very much, and we'll be returning to you shortly, I'm sure. Let's go to another seat now, which is a real interest for us this afternoon, and for you watching this afternoon, a real swing seat, again, between Labour and Plaid Cymru, currently held by Lee Waters. And Helen Mary Jones was in competition with him there for Llanelli. We can speak to Ellen, who's at the count for us and is going to be looking at Llanelli closely for us this afternoon. Now, if this was a disappointment for Plaid as well, we're looking at quite a story this afternoon. So what are you hearing there?
Good afternoon, Andrea. Well, as you can see behind me, counting is well underway here at Carmarthen. We've got the Carmarthen East and Denefr seat here, but also the Llanelli seat. I'll just start with the Carmarthen East and Denefr. This is considered a safe seat for Plaid Cymru, having won here in all of the last elections since 1999. The rumour here is that they are likely to secure that seat this time again. Adam Price was here just half an hour ago, had a flying visit and has now left, but he did look confident. Now then, on to the Llanelli seat. This is a marginal seat between Plaid Cymru and Labour. The type of seat that, well, both will be desperate to grab onto. Labour won here last time with only around 400 votes in it. Helen Mary Jones, Plaid Cymru's candidate, is here this afternoon. Lee Waters nowhere to be seen at the moment. Expect this to be a tight race, one of the seats that will definitely define this election.
So I'll keep you updated.
Ellen, for now, thank you very much indeed. We'll return to you a little later on this afternoon. So just to recap, if you've just joined us, we've just got one seat declared so far this afternoon, and that's a Conservative hold for Montgomeryshire and Russell George. So that was considered a fairly safe Conservative seat. So we do just have one result declared this afternoon so far, but we are here till 5 o'clock, so much more information to give you yet, so do stay with us. We're going to head north now and speak to Carol Green. The north area has been particularly of interest. In the northeast particularly, it's an area which we talk about in terms of a battleground for Labour and the Conservatives, and in the general election in 2019 we saw very much lots of those seats being taken by the Conservatives in some shock results there. Carol, what's the picture looking like for you?
Well, Andrea, that is the big question here in North East Wales. Those voters here who so convincingly backed the Conservatives in 2019. Of course, Brexit was in play then. Did they lend their votes, or will they turn out for the Conservatives again? Back then, they turned that red wall, which stretched along North Wales, they turned it blue, and that's what the Conservatives have been hoping to do again. They've been campaigning with their big hitters here in North East Wales. We've had visits from the Prime Minister and also Rishi Sunak. Of course, the Vale of Clwyd. Now, the Vale of Clwyd is the towns of Rhyl and Prestatyn and Denbigh, those rural villages as well. That's a top Tory target. They've also got their sights on Wrexham, and of course you've got a Welsh Labour minister has been sitting in that seat. But speaking to politicians here at the Count for Delyn and for Alyn and Deeside today, they just can't put their finger on how it's going. It's very, very tight. That's the message coming from both camps, that these North East Wales seats will be very tight. There won't be that, as one Conservative candidate for Delyn, Mark Isherwood, he's also standing on the regional list. He said to me there won't be, he's not expecting an avalanche of change. I get the feeling that Labour, they're not expecting that disaster that the party have had in England and Hartlepool. They're not expecting that to happen here, but it's going to be very tight.
Carol Green in Deeside, thank you. And that's a story we're going to be watching all afternoon, of course, to see what's happening in the UK today, and in seats like Hartlepool, which we've seen being taken by the Conservatives, to see how that plays out in Wales, if indeed that story does play out at all throughout the afternoon in Wales. Let's go to another seat now, which, is going to be considered a tight one, and that's the Vale of Glamorgan, and we can speak to Charanpreet Kaur. This is the seat of Jane Hutt, who is considered a very close advisor to the First Minister, Mark Drakeford. But this is a key Conservative target seat as well, Charanpreet.
It is, Andrea, and it's really all to play for here in the Vale of Glamorgan. We're at really early stages at the moment. Down below me, the counters are still at verification stage, so they're going through the vote piles, figuring out how many constituency votes, how many regional votes we've got. Both are important. I'll get to the regional votes in a minute, but the constituency that we're looking out for here is the Vale of Glamorgan. Now, Labour sources seem to be a little bit more confident than they had been earlier about this seat. They say that Jane Hutt's been well received on the campaign trail. Now, she has been in power here since 1999, and they're hoping that that personal vote will carry her through here. But that is just speculation. We really don't know how it's going to go at the moment. We can't read too much into it. It would be significant if they kept this seat, however, and it would mean that they were outperforming the polls and those early indications of how voters might decide this time round. it's a real target for the Conservatives. They're really keen to clinch this, and that will be vital for them in terms of challenging Labour's dominance. They had Boris Johnson here in Barry earlier this week, and so far the polls suggest that they're doing fairly well. So all to play for in the Vale of Glamorgan. We'll also be looking out later in the day for the regional result here for South Wales Central. At the moment, Andrew R.T. Davies holds a Conservative seat. We're expecting him to hold that. Question is, will he have another Tory by his side, and how will those other 2 seats end up? All to play for here.
Sharon Prick-Kara, Barry, looking closely at that Vale of Glamorgan count particularly, thank you very much indeed. And of course, a seat that the Conservatives hold at Westminster with former Welsh Secretary Alan Cairns. So we'll keep you posted on what's happening in the Vale of Glamorgan this afternoon. Let's go to a break now. Hello and welcome back this afternoon to our coverage of the Senedd election 2021. If you've just joined us, we're on air till 5 o'clock this afternoon, looking at all the results as they arrive and trying to explain to you why all of this matters as best we can. And a reminder that all of this as well is being updated on our website at itv.com/Wales. So if you want to keep an eye on that as well as we go through the afternoon to try and make sense of it all, then all the information will be right there for you at your fingertips. Adrian also has all the information right on his Wheel of Fortune on the graphic screen.
I'm looking rather plaintively at just the single sliver of result, which is Montgomeryshire in this in the Senedd chamber. Yes, let's come back to that in a little while when we've got some more results.
Yes, the one that people can see on their screens in the bottom left-hand corner is the one seat that's been held by the Conservatives in Montgomeryshire. Just to remind people, from your point of view, what do you expect to happen in the next few hours? Because the picture from our most recent poll to what you might be thinking now, even that may have changed.
I think that's right. I think the Conservatives were looking to have had a very good set of results. At the very least, it's going to be mixed, possibly actually a bad set of results. Our poll showed that Plaid Cymru was looking at a difficult time. I think that's the case. I think they are going to have a fairly dodgy set of results. And for Welsh Labour, well, they look like they've held on in the face of a lot of other pressure, but maybe not enough to form a majority government. More of that in a moment. Can I just plonk some names in your brain of places that I think may have been interesting and no longer in play? So Vale of Glamorgan looks like it's no longer going to the Conservatives, as Sharon Preet was saying a little earlier. Llanelli looks as though it's no longer in play and will be held by Labour, not Plaid Cymru. The Rhondda, as Rob was telling us, looks like it's going to go back to Labour from Plaid Cymru. Still in play, I think, Vale of Clwyd and Wrexham for the Conservatives. Brecon and Radnorshire could be a Conservative gain too. And how about Aberconwy? Let's keep an eye on Aberconwy because it's a tight result there. It's currently Conservative. Plaid Cymru, they're mixed messages. Plaid themselves tell me, no, we don't think so. But other people are telling me that it could well be won by Plaid. If it does, Aaron Wynne, who is the Plaid candidate, will be the youngest Senedd member, and his partner is a Lib Dem candidate in this election. So that makes for some interesting conversations.
You've got all the top facts, haven't you, Adrian?
all the best.
Interesting. You started off there talking about the Vale of Glamorgan, and we spoke to Sharon Preet a little earlier on, and you say the rumour now is that it's not going to go to the Conservatives. I mean, if you look at some Hartlepool in the United Kingdom that we just saw yesterday in the by-election, that did go to the Conservatives in quite a shock victory, but maybe not seeing the same sort of tale. I think
that's a story that we're going to be looking at because there is a big overarching story that is being told across the UK today of Conservative success and Labour failure. That doesn't look like it's happened. It doesn't necessarily mean that Welsh Labour will have enough seats to form a government, but it does mean that Labour in Wales has once again bucked the trend. Still lots of look at all that empty space.
We've got so much more to talk about this afternoon, haven't we? But it is important to make that distinction, isn't it? Because what people may be seeing in the headlines,
indeed, on
the TV, on the radio, in the newspapers, on their websites, may very well much be that story about Labour not succeeding in the UK, but that's not the tale here. We've got much more to tell you yet.
Making that clear.
Yes, Adrian, thank you very much for now. Well, as I said, we have reporters all across the country for you this afternoon, bringing you the story from where they are in Wales through till 5 o'clock. Let's speak to Hannah Thomas now, who's in Blaenau Gwent for us. The Blaenau Gwent seat, of course, at the moment is held by Labour. It's considered a fairly safe Labour seat, but it could come with some challenges as well. For more on this, let's speak to Hannah. Over to you, Hannah.
Yes, thanks, Andrea. As you were saying, this was a top Plaid Cymru target. The incumbent member of the Senedd, Alan Davies, he was elected in 2011. I was here actually when he was elected that night. But in 2016, his majority was cut to just 650 by Plaid Cymru then, and that became a top Labour target, top Plaid Cymru target, I beg your pardon, this time around. However, Plaid sources have already told me that it's looking like Alan will hold on. It'll be actually a safe victory for him this afternoon. afternoon. Elsewhere within the South Wales East patch, we're looking at Caerphilly. Now, Caerphilly, that was also a top Plaid Cymru target. Delyth Jewell there, she was looking to take that seat from Labour's Hefin David. Last time around, Hefin had a majority of just 1,500. So again, it was a little bit all to play for. However, Plaid sources there say it's not looking good. It looks like Labour's Hefin David will hold on. We don't yet know what's going to happen as far as the regional list seats go. We're expecting, what, another 7 hours perhaps before we get any sort of declaration on that, or any steer on where we're sort of going with that as it happens. However, when we talk about this red wall, Andrea, we talk about maybe in the northeast of Wales, we talk about in England perhaps, and we talk about the valleys, and perhaps the valleys is the greatest bastion of Labour support that we've actually had, isn't it? Plaid Cymru, of course, we're looking to maybe knock some green bricks into this strong Labour wall this time around. However, it's very much looking that that strong Labour wall and the concrete holding it together will stand firm for now.
Hannah Thomas, thank you. And as you rightly said, reminding people there that it's quite unlikely that we'll get any of the results for the regional seats till much later on this afternoon, possibly later on this evening. But I think I mentioned to you that Adrian and I are back in the studio here at 9 o'clock. So if we haven't got the full picture by 5, then we should have a little bit more of the full picture by 9. So you can return to find out where those regional seats might be going at 9 o'clock if you feel so obliged. Well, let's travel now further west down the coast in Wales, and let's speak to Jess Main, who's in Ceredigion for us this afternoon, the seat of the presiding officer, and possibly some nerves there, although considered fairly safe for Plaid. As we've heard across some other seats in the nation this afternoon, there's lots of Plaid Cymru nerves. How are things seeming to play out there this afternoon, Jess?
Yes, Andrea, this is considered to be a safe seat for Plaid Cymru. As you say, Ellen Jones has been in position here since 1999. We spoke to her earlier. She said she's never confident and never takes things for granted, but if the amount of placards that are around are anything to go by, then they should be okay. Now, counting is not long due to get underway here in Ceredigion, but it's all eyes on the regional list seats. And as you said, we're not expecting a result there any time soon. What's interesting in this part of Wales, though, and what will have an impact on the Mid and West Wales regional seat is, of course, though, Brecon and Radnorshire. It's one of the Senedd most closely watched electoral battles. It's, of course, traditionally been held by the Lib Dems, but it now really is a two-horse race between the Lib Dems and the Tories. For the Lib Dems, it's really their toehold in Welsh politics, so they'll be, keeping everything crossed that they can hold on to that, and it will have a big implication on how the Mid and West Wales region will look later on this evening.
Jess in Ceredigion, thank you. And just a reminder that if you are joining us this afternoon, we have got one seat declared so far, and that's a Conservative hold for Russell George in Montgomeryshire. So just one seat so far, but we're just going to take you on a bit of a journey around the country. That's what we're doing at the moment, to see what's expected, what the picture is looking like in key battlegrounds, and how the parties are feeling. And we'll go to the Senedd in just a little while as well to get a bit more of the party reaction for you today, as some of what we're expecting this afternoon starts to unfold, and as Adrian reiterated a few moments ago, some of the rumours that are starting to come in about where we think some of these key seats will go as well. But for now, let's head to Swansea, where we can speak to Dean Thomas. There's some interesting seats that Dean's keeping an eye on, some fairly safe Labour seats in regards of Swansea West and Swansea East, but there could be some interesting things to keep an eye on in the Gower and in Bridgend. Dean, over to you.
Yes, well, Andrea, counting has only just begun here at Swansea West. That means we're unlikely to get a declaration until around about 5:30, 6 o'clock. Counting for Swansea East and Gower is happening just across the road over in the local leisure centre. Again, we're expecting a declaration there around about 5:30, 6 o'clock. That means the declaration for the regional list, as you probably heard a few times already, is going to go on quite late into the night. It could even possibly happen tomorrow. But as you mentioned there, Swansea East and Swansea West are going to be pretty safe Labour holds, it seems. Where there could be some drama in Swansea is over in the Gower constituency, where the Conservative candidate Miles Langston is looking to take the seat away from the Labour candidate Rebecca Evans. And just another interesting point of note is that Plaid Cymru candidate Dr Di Lloyd is not on the regional list this year. He's actually contesting Swansea West. And if he was to lose this election, which all the indication is that he will, then that will be one less familiar face in the Senedd during the next Welsh Parliament.
Dean Thomas in Swansea for us and talking about some of those other key battlegrounds as well. Yeah, we're keeping a close eye on the Gower, as you say, and that's the seats of Rebecca Evans, who's the Finance Minister, and that is a target for the Conservatives in Wales as well. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that. And indeed, Dean's also going to be keeping a close eye on Bridgend, which went to the Conservatives in the general election of 2019. In the Senedd, a former seat, of course, of the former First Minister, Carwyn Jones. So we'll see this time whether the candidate standing in place for Labour this time can secure a victory and hold on for Labour there. Well, let's get some party reaction now, because we haven't heard from the party so far in the programme this afternoon. We can go, if you like, to our spin room in the Senedd with Ellie Pitt, who's standing by to get some reaction from each of the main parties this afternoon. One result, one declaration to analyse, but plenty more to talk about as we speculate on the picture building up throughout these results. Ellie.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, I'm here in the heart of Welsh democracy as potential candidates across Wales will be hoping that they've done enough to secure a seat here in the Senedd for the next 5 years. With me to go through some of the political reaction to the seats as they get declared across this afternoon, and to give us a sense of how the parties are feeling ahead of that, I'm joined by Conservative MP Faye Jones. I'm also here with Hywel Williams, a Plaid Cymru MP, and Anna McMorran, the Labour MP. Anna, first of all, just talk us through how you feel Labour are feeling going into these declarations this afternoon. What's the sense on the ground within the party?
Well, look, there's no doubt it's been a difficult night for Labour across the UK, but here in Wales, we are so proud to have fought such a positive campaign. We went into this campaign with the polls saying we were 10 points behind the Tories. We have emerged positive, with Mark Drakeford showing that absolute determined leadership that he has shown throughout his leadership and throughout this pandemic. So really, really hopeful, but of course without a Wales-wide exit poll, very difficult to say.
I mean, you touched there on the Labour, changing across as the polls were released and things getting a little bit more hopeful. I mean, do you think you've done enough, though, to sort of hold on to that situation?
Look, I've been out speaking to voters across this campaign and across Wales, in fact, and time again, voters telling me how much they appreciate the leadership of Mark Drakeford, how he has carried them through this pandemic, made the right decisions time and time again, and what a contrast they have seen from the Tories and the Johnson-led government in Westminster. And that's been really striking. Lifelong Tories saying that they're going to vote Labour.
Well, let's bring in some of your colleagues here from Conservative and Plaid Cymru parties. First of all, just tell me a little bit about what the sort of senses you're hearing behind the scenes. What's going on in your WhatsApp groups this morning and this afternoon?
Well, it's very early to say, of course, with just one result in. That's a very good result for us, by the way, in Trefaldwyn, with Elwyn Vaughan coming second for us and beating the Lib Dems. He used to own that seat at one time, I think. So if I can just say that first, but we clearly are facing a difficult election because of the COVID dominating it.
In the Rhondda, perhaps in Llanelli,
sure.
We've heard this afternoon just from Rob, who's sort of at those counts, saying that the Rhondda could go against Plaid Cymru.
Yeah, sure, it could, of course, and Llanelli. Well, we don't know we're against a sitting member there as well, and. Leanne Wood in the Rhondda, of course, is from the Rhondda, has worked there for the last 20-odd years, and she has been an excellent member. As I was saying, it's a campaign that has been dominated by COVID and by the attention that, both Boris Johnson and Mark Drakeford have been getting. But, that what we have in these elections are 40 by-elections, I suppose, as a general election, and it's difficult to say from one place to another.
Well, another one that's going to be difficult to call is, of course, Brecon and Radnorshire. So, Faye Jones, for the Conservatives, just how tight do you think that's going to be, and what's the sense that you've got from your party at the moment?
Well, I'm really optimistic about Brecon and Radnorshire. We've been working really hard there. We've got a fantastic candidate in James Evans. And people are looking for change because the current member of the Senedd, Kirsty Williams, who's represented us there for 21 years, is standing down. So that's a huge opportunity. But there is real frustration that the Liberal Democrats have thrown their lot in with the Labour Party. And that's not what people voted for in BNR. So I'm really optimistic. It's looking good, but far too early to say.
OK, cautious optimism from everybody in a sense. And you've touched on it there, all of you really, about how COVID has shaped this election. Anna, just sort of talk us through what you sort of think and how the COVID election might have changed things or might have kind of forced voters to stick to what they know.
Well, look, and it's been difficult for everyone, and it's only in the last few weeks that we've been able to actually get out to speak to people, knock doors and have those conversations in a COVID-safe way, but actually getting out. And that has actually been the game changer, I think, for us in terms of hearing and listening to voters on the ground.
Do you think that the pandemic has kind of masked and been able to do a lot of covering up for Mark Drakeford of the sort of previous few years? He's been able to sort of come out front and centre and lead on this, but actually kind of burying a few things under the carpet that he probably wouldn't have liked to have come out.
Not at all. I think what this has shown, this pandemic, is an absolute steadfast, cautious leadership from Mark, but also in a way that he's listened to the science, the scientific evidence, been led by that and taken those decisions accordingly. And people respect that. He's spoken the truth. He's come out day in, day out on the press briefings and spoken to people. And people wanted to listen to that. It's been difficult, but I think what this Welsh Labour government has done now, led by Mark, is they have helped people in ways which perhaps in England and the Tory government haven't been able to do.
Just a quick sum up then from Hal and from Faye. First of all, Hal, as we sit here now, just one result waiting, how are you feeling about the trajectory of the rest of the afternoon, just briefly?
Well, I think, it's going to be more of the same in many ways. There's not going to be huge amounts of change. It is difficult to change the numbers in this place, in the Senedd. So looking forward, much of the same, I think, but there's a great deal to do.
Much of the same, but Faye, for the Conservatives, you said people are ready for change. So just briefly, what do you think will happen across the next few hours?
Well, I think we'll see a real difference between rural and urban Wales. And of course, that's the race that I'm interested in Brecon and Radnorshire. Montgomeryshire gives us a good example. So the Lib Dem vote there has dropped by about 10%. I think that's a very clear rejection of the Liberal Democrats. So I think we might see that repeating right across Mid Wales. Whether that's repeated in South and North Wales, we'll see. But I think we will see that clear divide between rural and urban Wales, which is very obvious in my part of the world.
Fantastic. For all of you, thank you very much for the moment. Some cautious optimism at the moment here in the Senedd. As those results come in, perhaps that'll change and we'll perhaps get a little bit more of a candid response of how their parties have fared up in this Senedd election.
Ellie Pitts and guests, thank you very much. And yes, hearing lots of confidence there as much as possible at the moment from the respective parties. I'm sure I'll be talking to Adrian a little later on what was touched upon there regarding the leadership of Mark Drakeford and whether that plays into the fact that to what extent this is proving to be a COVID election, a pandemic election, and judgment on his leadership around that to see how the Labour vote pans out. And of course, Ellie there talking to Plaid Cymru and to the Conservatives about some key seats there. And that's going to be unfolding throughout the afternoon, mentioning the Rhondda. As we've heard, we have no result there yet. But Labour have declared a victory there. But as I say, I'm saying that very cautiously because we do not have a result there. But that would be a disappointment for Plaid Cymru. And Llanelli as well, a key seat. Talked about that with Hywel Williams. If Labour were to hold that, that would be disappointing for Plaid Cymru. And Faye Jones talking about Brecon and Radnorshire, because of course that's a seat held by the Education Minister Kirsty Williams. And if that were to go to the Tories, that would be a big story this afternoon. So we'll keep an eye on that one. Whew, let's take a breath and take a break now. Hello and welcome back to our coverage of the Senedd elections 2021 for ITV Cymru Wales. Welcome to Wales Decides. Now you can see the total tallies of who has declared so far from the counts in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. There's just one lowly blue one there at the moment, and that's for Montgomeryshire and Russell George, who has held on to the seat there for the Conservatives. Let's head further west now to Carmarthen, where counts are taking place, and we're going to speak to Ellen there, who's our reporter, who is with Helen Mary Jones this afternoon, who is the Plaid Cymru candidate for Llanelli. Now, it's considered a very tight race between the Labour Party and Plaid Cymru there, and whatever happens in this seat, one MS will be lost, because we should explain that Helen Mary Jones is currently a regional member of the Senedd. So either way, one MS will be lost. So let's speak to Ellen now, who has Helen Mary Jones with her this afternoon.
Thank you, Andrea. Just like you mentioned, yes, joining me here, I have Helen Mary Jones, Plaid Cymru's candidate for Llanelli. Now then, this is considered a sort of two-horse race between Plaid Cymru and Labour. How are you feeling?
Well, this time when the campaigning is finished and you're waiting for the result is always really nerve-wracking. While the campaign is going on, there's something you can do to try and change the result. Now we've just got to wait and see. So I think all the candidates here are on pins, really. And as you said, this has been a very close election last time for the Senedd, and it's looking as if it might be that way again, but much too soon to tell.
Yeah, are you feeling confident? We're hearing rumours that perhaps Labour are in the lead. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, those can only be rumours, because in an ordinary election you'd have many more people from each party in the count, and we'd be looking at the boxes as they were opened and taking samples of what the results look like. Now, we can't do that now, obviously, because of COVID regulations. There are fewer people in there, and we can only see the boxes at the end of the tables, so it's much too difficult to tell. From what little we have seen, things are very much as we would expect it to be. The boxes in Llanelli town are a little bit stronger for Labour, the boxes in the Gwendraeth Valley a little bit stronger for us, so it still looks neck and neck to us, but as I say, the amount of sampling of the boxes we can do means that that's not scientific. But anybody who thinks they can call the result of this on what we've been able to see so far, it isn't right. That's not correct.
It's not looking too promising in Rhondda either. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know if that's true. They will, like us, be counting under COVID restrictions. So again, anything is speculation. You may be seeing people feeling positive, for example, about the way in which the Labour government has handled the pandemic. We didn't hear as much of that on the doorsteps as I'd expected, but if any of this is true, that may be the case. But, you know, Leanne Wood is a really strong candidate in Rhondda. She's worked so hard for those communities, and I'll be really surprised if those communities don't repay her with that loyalty that she's given them.
In terms of the party's overall picture then, how are you feeling? Are you getting any sort of hints from anywhere?
Well, it's the same everywhere. I mean, apart from the fact that we came second in Montgomeryshire, where the result has been declared, and of course that's very good news for us, and not good news at all for the Liberal Democrats, when that's the seat that they held until recently. But until the results are actually declared, because of this business about only being able to sample a very small number, I honestly don't think we know. And that makes the waiting even harder, to be honest, because you can't even have a sense of whether I should be preparing an acceptance speech or an apology speech, and that's a being graceful in losing speech, and that's the same for candidates all over Wales. Really tricky one.
Helen Mary Jones, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr, and we are expecting those results in a few hours' time.
Ellen, thank you, and thank you very much to Helen Mary Jones as well, speaking to you in Carmarthen. I think you could really sense the nerves there, a tangible sense of nerves and excitement. A few hours yet, so we expect that result to be declared in Llanelli, as Ellen said. And as you would expect probably at this stage, where things are so tense in such a tight race, some disagreement over whether or not at this stage that results can be called or not. I think Adrian was saying to me a little earlier on that Labour hold was expected there, according to his sources. Helen Mary Jones there saying that no, that is not the case. It's too early for us to call that at all, she said. So as you would expect, some disagreement there amongst the parties. Well, Labour are also claiming victory for the Rhondda again. No result there yet, but that is what we're hearing from Labour, meaning that Plaid Cymru's former leader would lose her seat. That's Leanne Wood, if that is the case. Votes are, as I said, still being counted and verified. But this is what Chris Bryant told ITV Cymru Wales earlier on.
It looks like, we've not counted a single vote yet, so I have to be very, very careful, but it looks like Leanne Wood will have lost the Rhondda tonight. So Adam Price's first job after removing Leanne as leader of Plaid Cymru will have been to have lost her seat here in the Rhondda.
And what are the indications that are pointing towards that?
Well, there's only so many things I'm allowed to say, aren't I, from what I've seen. But yesterday out on the door was positive. Yesterday out on the door here in the Rhondda, I think, was the most positive I've ever known. Loads of people coming up to us and saying definitely voting for Labour, voting for Mark Drakeford because he's been by far the best leader of any of the political parties here in Wales this last year. He's kept us safe. We've handled the pandemic better here in Wales than they have in England. And in particular, a really resounding vote of support for Buffy, the Labour candidate, who is just amazing. She is a force to be reckoned with, and I'm terrified.
You mentioned actually both there, but I mean, how much of this do you think is because of Buffy and what she did particularly during the floods, for example, and how much could be about those decisions that you made at Carmarthen?
I think a lot of people wanted not just an ordinary politician here in the Rhondda. I say this as a politician, of course, but they didn't want any more grievances and all that kind of stuff, and people giving it all that. They just wanted somebody who's going to get on and do things. And they saw Buffy. All the work she's done in the floods, getting floodgates for people, feeding people during the pandemic, and all the work, frankly, that Buffy and I have been able to do together as a team. And I think they went, yeah, we want a bit of that. We want politicians who are going to get on and do things, not just talk about things.
And so we're back to a Labour seat by that time.
It looks like, and it's intriguing, isn't it? Because I think people kind of wanted to give Plaid a chance last time, and frankly, Leanne and Adam Price have blown it. What I'd say to Adam, all those ranting speeches you made when wagging your finger all the time at the voters, I don't think you've got anything to crow about, and I'm very hopeful that Mark Drakeford might be able to form a new government without having to do any kind of coalition with Plaid.
Well, that's what Chris Bryant for Labour had to say earlier about the Rhondda seat, which they're declaring victory in the Rhondda, but I should say we don't have a result there yet, so we have to be very cautious about what we say. Chris Bryant not being so cautious about what he was saying. Just to reiterate some of the comments there, the most positive I've ever heard things on the doorstep. He was praising the leadership of Mark Drakeford, saying that is what's made a difference, but also praising the candidate they've got there, whose name is Buffy Williams, and giving all credit to her for her work. Let's speak to Rob now, who's getting reaction and letting us know everything he's hearing about the Rhondda seat. He's actually in Cardiff for us and keeping an eye on those all-important Cardiff counts as well. Rob?
Yeah, just a reminder, I am at Cardiff looking at what's happening here. I should say they're still verifying the vote, so we're a way off having any result here. And I'm also keeping an eye on the Rhondda. It's part of the same region. And listening to Chris Bryant there just reminds us that the Rhondda really is a tale of two constituencies. In Westminster terms, it is a safe Labour seat, but in Senedd terms, it is a swing seat. And of the three people who have represented the Rhondda since the dawn of devolution back in 1999, two of them have been members of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood being the incumbent. So if it is true she is lost, why might that be? Well, let's go back to 2016 when she won the seat. We should say she was in the Senedd before that as a regional member, but she won the constituency in 2016. She was the leader of Plaid Cymru. In that time, there were general elections. She was participating in national debates on television, standing opposite the Prime Minister of the day. That is a high profile. She doesn't have that now. Adam Price is the leader. There were other factors too. There were lots of anger, a lot of angry people in the Rhondda back in 2016 because you may remember there was talk about reorganising the Vale of Glamorgan hospital, the local general hospital, downgrading services, and the local Labour council were also reorganising schools. And who was the then member of the Assembly, as it was? Leighton Andrews, who was the Education Minister. So you can see how those combinations together helped Leanne win in 2016 and may have contributed to losing this time. Also, how this election has been fought, how the campaign has gone. Let's be honest, it hasn't sparked massive interest around the country. That's partly because campaigning in the traditional way hasn't been possible. Leanne Wood is one of those politicians who likes to get out there, knock doors, shake hands, talk to people. Couldn't do that in this election. They were restricted in when they could knock doors and talk to the voters. So all those factors may contribute to what may happen there. A lot of mays there, because they're still counting the vote. Quick word on where I am in Cardiff. In this room, they're counting the seat of the First Minister. That's Cardiff West. We expect him to be returned. And next door, they're counting the seat of Vaughan Gethin, the Health Minister. Now, we haven't heard from them at the moment, have we? Vaughan Gethin, there's a rumour he may be in a studio of another broadcaster. I don't know if that's even possible, but that may be true. But we may hear from him shortly when he comes back here. And we expect we're going to hear from the First Minister perhaps within the next hour or so. So we'll get the first reaction as to his thinking, what he's hearing on the ground, whether, if we all predict that Labour will be the biggest party, whether he thinks he's got enough to go alone, or whether he may have to strike a deal with another party, say Plaid Cymru.
Who knows? Coalitions, understandings or agreements, as other parties have been referring to them as over the last couple of days. Well, that is certainly all in play. We only have one result in so far, so just who knows what's going to happen. But I'm sure over the weekend and as things take their course, we are certainly going to be talking about coalitions, understandings, agreements. But as Rob said, at the moment, we are saying may a lot because we just don't know. It's a lot of speculation, a lot of ifs, buts and maybes. But the Rhondda seems to be a possibility of making a headline again. It made headlines in 2016. When it changed hands. It was the only seat to change hands then when Leanne Wood took it for Plaid Cymru, and lots of rumours that it may be going to Labour today. But as we say, we do not know that as yet. So Rob there summarising things in the Rhondda. Let's head right up north now to speak to Carol Green, who's in Deeside for us this afternoon. Let's just remind ourselves of the general picture there. Now, this is an area where the Conservatives are going to be hoping to make ground. Seats in 2019 in the general election, many of those red wall seats crumbled down to go to the Conservatives. In fact, I think, well, Clwyd South, Vale of Clwyd, Wrexham, Delyn, all targets. Allen and Deeside didn't at that stage, but it will still be a target as well, won't it, Carol?
It certainly will. If we just start with the two counts that are underway here, that's Delyn and Allen and Deeside. Well, not really expecting any change there. That Labour quietly confident that those two seats will be holds. But the wider regional picture is much more volatile, much more in play, and frankly, much more interesting. Let's start with that top Tory target of the Vale of Clwyd. Now, if you're not familiar with the Vale of Clwyd, that's the big town would be Rhyl and Prestatyn. Inland, you've got Denbigh and those rural villages. Now, for the Westminster elections, it's gone back and forth between Labour and the Conservatives. 2019, the Conservatives took it back. But in the Assembly elections, it's always been Anne Jones Labour, one of the long-standing members. But we've had a change of candidate as Anne Jones has stepped down this time for the Senedd election. So that's always a vulnerable time for a party. Now, Brexit was a big issue in 2019, and the Conservatives have put some real effort into this seat. We've had the Prime Minister in the Vale of Clwyd, we've had Rishi Sunak just in the last few days there trying to get this seat over the line in the Senedd for the Conservatives. But the big question is, those voters in the Vale of Clwyd which voted for the Tories in 2019, was that just a lend of a vote, or is it sticking? Looking further west, Aberconwy is going to be very interesting. Plaid doing very well there. Now that, those early polls, Plaid would say it would be a stretch for them, but they seem to be knocking on the door there in Aberconwy. And of course, that's Aberconwy, that's Llandudno, a big tourist town where we'd expect the Conservatives to do well on their COVID message of getting the businesses up and running and open again, and very supportive on furlough. So Aberconwy is definitely going to be one to watch. Finally, Wrexham, of course, a Welsh Labour minister in there, in Leslie Griffiths. That's been her seat, but it seems Labour are under pressure there. I'm hearing that the Conservatives think they're ahead, but the big question mark is over the postal votes. No one seems to know where they're going, and those could be a decider across this very interesting region.
It is a very interesting region indeed, and as you say, Aberconwy, another one to watch, because on paper that looks like it's a three-way margin and all the three main parties could have a stake there. So we'll certainly be returning to Carol to talk about that throughout the course of the afternoon. Let's talk about another seat now, which is a Tory target currently held by Labour's Jane Hutt, and considered to be very tight in the race here. The Welsh Conservatives really desperate to get their hands on this, and that's the Vale of Glamorgan. Let's speak to Charanpreet Kaur and let's find out whether we've got any more information on when we might hear about the Vale of Glamorgan. Charanpreet.
No new information just yet, I'm afraid, Andrea. Now, this is, of course, a very different count to usual. Usually, we'd have a little bit more steer on how some of those numbers were looking. At the moment, we're still on the verification stage. We haven't yet got to the count. It will be the verification, then the count, then we'll start to get some steer on that constituency result for the Vale of Glamorgan, before we then move on to the regional result for South Wales Central further down the line. Now, this is, as you say, a marginal seat for Jane Hutt. 2016, she won the seat by just 777 votes. So all to play for then. But then once we find that out, we'll be keeping a firm eye on that regional seat. At present, there are 4 seats up for grabs. 2 Tories, one of those, of course, Andrew R.T. Davies, Plaid Cymru and UKIP. Now, that UKIP seat is the one that all of those smaller parties really have their eye on. Abolish might be hoping to make that gain here. Greens also looking out for this. That's really the seat for grabs. And if we look at the timings now, still on the verifications, if we think that we might get a Vale of Glamorgan result, say 5-6, it could be well into the evening before we know that really decisive regional result. And when we can start to see what that might mean for Mark Drakeford, what that might mean for the Conservatives in their attempts to clinch this one. But first of all, we're going to be finding out about the Vale of Glamorgan. Now, of course, Jane Hutt is one of the close advisors to Mark Drakeford, so it would be a real blow for him if she weren't able to hold this seat that she has held since 1999. Labour sources here telling us that they feel things might have gone better than expected, but as I say, not a traditional count. Down below we've got the counting and the verification going on, and in the room behind them we've got where the candidates would be. We're seeing fewer candidates, fewer party agents here than usual, and that's because of social distancing requirements, need to keep the numbers down. That's all meaning that it's a little bit trickier than usual to get a picture of how this is all going to turn out at the end of the day.
Charanpreet's in the Vale of Glamorgan for us this afternoon. Thank you for now. And Charanpreet was just saying there something we were talking about actually right at the start of the programme when we were explaining how the seats are divvied up. And of course, some of those seats, 20 of the seats, are regional seats, and we won't hear about those till probably a lot later on. But because of the way the voting system works across Wales in these Senedd elections, Charanpreet there was mentioning the Abolish the Welsh Assembly party, and it's parties like that, some of the smaller parties perhaps, because of the way the vote is counted in those regional seats, that may well take some of the seats in the regional counts. In fact, in the poll which we had for ITV Wales just a couple of days ago, it showed Abolish the Welsh Assembly taking 2 seats in that seat projection. So just to explain a little bit about where those smaller parties might make some headway as well this afternoon in those regional counts. But let's get back to the constituency counts, because those are the ones which we're talking about at the moment and are much more likely to declare whilst we're on air. We're waiting with bated breath at the moment. Let's talk to Adrian about the ones which he's particularly keeping an eye on this afternoon. You ran through a few of them earlier on, according to your sources, where you thought things might go. What's it looking like now?
And I'm just checking through the Masters Multimedia Hub here to see what kind of messages are going through. Yeah, the seats I'm still keeping my eye on. Brecon and Radnorshire, which takes in, as well as Brecon, places like Hay, Crickhowell and Bilth Wells. That might well go from Lib Dem to Conservative. Aberconwy we've spoken about, that's around the Llandudno area. That could go to Plaid Cymru. Plaid Cymru themselves I think it might be unlikely, but it's going to be tight when we're in another. Wrexham and the Vale of Clwyd. Vale of Clwyd is around the St Asaph real area. They could still go from Labour to Conservative, but things are looking different. I mean, I suppose we keep saying this, but when you come to read your newspaper tomorrow or look on Facebook or see other news programmes, you're going to hear a story of Labour disaster and Conservative success. That's not the story here in Wales. Labour may not have enough to form a government in the Senedd, but it will have held on to its vote and to its constituencies and be pleased with what it's achieved. The Conservatives look like they've missed their opportunity. The Welsh Nationalist Plaid Cymru seem to have slipped back too. And you mentioned the smaller parties in the regions. Will be keeping an eye out for them. So there is a different story happening here in Wales. Welsh and English politics very often seem to be very similar. Definitely.
And just to remind people that we were talking about the race to 30, weren't we, earlier on? And when you say Labour may well not have enough for a majority, that's the yes. key figure they're looking at.
Any party needs at least 30 to be able to do anything really in the Senedd. And if they don't have it themselves, they have to look at a coalition with another party. It's difficult to see where that coalition could happen. So interesting times. And I should just say, before we move on, although it's early days, I think that any kind of coalition or post-election discussions are going to focus on the future of leaders. Adam Price and Andrew R.T. Davies, messages are coming in here already. Big questions over their future.
Well, that will be one to discuss after we have taken a break, Adrian. For now, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a quick break for you now. Welcome back to Wales Decides and our coverage of the Senedd elections 2021 here on ITV Cymru Wales. Let's take a look at a roundup of the latest results and the news that's just been coming in. Well, we're still waiting for the majority of the results, but so far we know that the Conservatives have held on to Montgomeryshire. Russell George will keep his seat. The results also show there has been a substantially increased majority there, a majority of 7,500 for the Tories with a 50% turnout for the constituency. Really good turnout there. Meanwhile, Labour have been claiming victory for the Rhondda, but we haven't, and I emphasise we have not, received an official declaration from Tylerstown yet. The seat would be an important gain for the party, taking over former Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood's seat. Of course, she won there with a momentous victory in 2016. Labour's Chris Bryant told ITV Cymru Wales that he believes the party has taken the Rhondda and said that the party had the most positive reaction he's ever known whilst out speaking to people in the constituency yesterday. Well, despite Labour's claims, Plaid Cymru has released a statement saying it's proud of its positive campaign, based on its ambition to create a fairer, greener and independent Wales. It also says campaigning during a pandemic and with an unprecedented focus on the London parties made the context challenging. Well, as we've been hearing, the Conservatives have held on to Montgomeryshire, where there was a large majority for the Tories, 7,500 in fact, and that's more than double the majority, actually, which they had back in 2016, which was just over 3,000. This is what the elected MS for the constituency, Russell George, said a little earlier on.
Well, it's a privilege to be elected for a third term to represent the people of Montgomeryshire in the Senedd. Significantly increased majority, so thank you to the people of Montgomeryshire for putting their trust in me and giving me that endorsement. But for me, it's a huge privilege to represent the place where I was born and have lived all my life. I think the key issue was about the recovery of our economy. I think that was the most important issue to people. I mean, there are other factors coming into play. There are national factors and how the UK government has been successful in terms of the vaccination strategy. And there are issues about the Welsh government, either how well or not they've done in terms of supporting businesses throughout Mid Wales. These are some of the issues that people were talking about. But obviously, as an incumbent, a lot of people were talking about how I may have helped them over the last 10 years, and I think that's obviously a factor as well. All these are factors that come into play when you're talking to people on the doorstep.
It's been quite a comprehensive victory for the Conservatives here in Montgomeryshire. Is this, do you think, going to be representative of other results across Wales?
I don't know. It's too hard to tell really at the moment. The results in other parts of Wales, I haven't had any sort of accurate intel. We were the first result here in Wales, so my congratulations to Powys County Council in that regard. I suppose the most significant aspect of this result, it was a significant increase in the Conservative vote. Never have we seen a vote like this in the Senedd election. But also, of course, seeing Plaid Cymru jump ahead of the Liberal Democrats. You know, I think they've fought a very hard campaign in Montgomeryshire. So my congratulations to Elwyn and Plaid Cymru as they come in second place as well for the first time in an election in Montgomeryshire.
Russell George there, who's held on to the seat for the Conservatives in Montgomeryshire and more than doubled his majority there. He's been a member of the Senedd since 2011 and a really pretty high turnout, really, around 50%, I'm led to believe. Let's, a little bit of news actually coming in for you from the Vale of Clwyd, and that is currently held by Anne Jones, who is stepping down in the Vale of Clwyd. So there will be a new member of the Senedd there, and it is a Tory target seat, currently held by Labour, as I said. And the news we're getting from there, as you can see on your screens, is that there is a recount confirmed in the Vale of Clwyd. So we will bring you more news on that as and when we get it. Let's head to Swansea now and speak to Dean Thomas, who is with, I believe, Julie James, Housing Minister. Dean, over to you.
Yes, well, I'm in Swansea West. The count is going on behind me. We're hearing that the counts in Swansea East and Gower are being delayed. But before we go on, let's take another look at another count we're keeping our eye on, and that is Bridgend. Now, there has been some concern within the Labour Party in the lead-up in this election about Bridgend, because, of course, you remember in 2019, Bridgend returned a Conservative MP. But our understanding is that turnout has been high and the vote for Labour has been strong. And whatever happens in Bridgend, there's going to be a new MS. It seems that Sarah Murphy, the Labour candidate, will be that MS because, of course, the former First Minister Carwyn Jones decided not to stand there. But here back in Swansea West, joining me now is the Labour candidate Julie James. Julie, confident here in Swansea West?
Well, it's too soon to say, of course, because we've just finished the verification, about to start the count. It looks okay for us.
It's taken a bit of time, isn't it? You're going to have to wait a while.
Yeah, and the verification is really complicated. 3 ballot papers for them to check. They're doing a good job. It's unnecessarily slow. The spacing is difficult. It's been a long morning. But yeah, it's looking okay. Too soon to read.
Yeah, in Swansea West, Swansea East, pretty safe Labour seats. If there is going to be some drama, as we've discussed, that could be in Gower. How do you see that going? What have you heard about Gower so far?
So I've been out on the doors with Rebecca Evans, who's an excellent member of the Senedd, obviously our Finance Minister for the Welsh Government. She's worked hard, she's popular there. It seems okay on the doors, but very difficult to call. It's always a tight seat, small margins.
Have you had concerns about Gower in the lead-up to this?
We always like to keep an eye on Gower, but I wouldn't say concerns. Concerns is a bit too high, but we like to keep an eye on it. So, I've been to every single target seats to watch on the Welsh Labour list. So I've been all over Wales. Gower seems okay.
Yeah. We've heard good news about Labour in the Rhondda. They're pretty confident there. You've been out on the streets in Rhondda. What have you been hearing from the electorate?
Being out with Elizabeth Williams there in Rhondda has been extraordinary. She's very popular locally. If the feeling on the road is anything to go by, then I wouldn't be surprised. But it'll be neck and neck. Leanne Wood is also a well-known figure there. Has been a member.
We're just going to return to the studio because unfortunately we've been having some sound problems there on the interview with Housing Minister Julie James in Swansea with Dean, but we will try and go back to that as and when we can. We can head though to Ceredigion and to Jess Main, who is with the presiding officer Ellen Jones, I believe. Now it'd be interesting to see what's being said there regarding Plaid Cymru hopes there and around the country as well, because we've heard lots of speculation, of course, about the Rhondda and about Llanelli. Jess, what's being said there regarding Plaid Cymru's hopes?
Well, Andrea, as we've previously said, it looks like this is a safe seat for Ellen Jones. She's been here for more than 20 years, and I'm pleased to say she joins us now. Welcome to the programme, Ellen. You've done this a few times now. How are you feeling today?
Well, it's my 6th election here in Ceredigion. It feels very different today. My first election in 1999 was a Friday count as well, so it was a daylight count, and this again is a daylight count, although it feels very different because everything seems to be moving a bit slower because of social distancing, and the numbers of counters here are fewer than in an usual election, so we're not expecting a very early declaration here, so I'm still a little bit in the dark as to what that will look like. I'm trying to look at as many screens as I can to see if I can see a pattern, as all candidates are doing. But hopefully the people of Ceredigion will see that, in me and in Plaid Cymru they have a strong voice for rural communities, and that's what I have been, and that's what I want to continue to do.
And you previously said this afternoon that you aren't taking anything for granted. Is it difficult still on election days for you, given that you have been in it for so long?
Well, yes, it is. I think because I've been in it for quite a while, I feel more nervous now. When I was a young candidate and standing in 1999, I almost had nothing to lose or nothing to prove at that point. When you're standing on your own record, then it feels that much more personal, possibly, than just political. So I always feel great deal of nervousness. I never take anything for granted. The electorate of Ceredigion, of course, have changed their minds over the years. You know, it's been a marginal seat. It's swung from the Lib Dems to Plaid Cymru to the Lib Dems to Plaid Cymru. Not in the Senedd. I've retained it in the Senedd, but in Westminster. So the people of Ceredigion are very independent-minded and can tell their politicians sometimes that they fancy a change. So, no, I never take anything for granted with the people here.
Potentially a nervous night for Plaid Cymru as a party too. Things aren't looking great in places like Llanelli and the Rhondda. What are your feelings on that?
Well, an election like this one, because of course it's the mix of constituency and the regional list, which provides the proportional representation and reflection of how the people more generally have voted, is always difficult to call early on just on the basis of constituencies. I think I found that it's quite difficult for Plaid Cymru in an election of this kind because of COVID, and of course the Welsh government and Labour has been leading on the COVID decision making in Wales, and Boris and his government across the UK has been leading there. So Plaid Cymru's kind of been squeezed in the middle of both the Tories and Labour, so it's found it more difficult possibly to get its voice and views heard. You know, Plaid Cymru has always been about putting a very positive, hopeful agenda in front of the people of Wales, and in a COVID election I think that's been more difficult than usual even.
And it's probably too soon to start talking about coalitions yet, but it has been discussed, a potential coalition between Labour and Plaid. I know leader Adam Price has said that he didn't want to be sort of an under party, as it were. What do you make of that? Is that a possibility?
Well, it's definitely too early. In a few hours it may not be, but it's definitely early at the moment. I think what Wales needs more than anything at this point is a strong government, a stable government, because we're still in a precarious COVID situation. We need to have a stability of government going forward. If there is no overall majority government from one party, then it is the case that, as we've done in the past in the Senedd with previous coalition governments, that parties will need to look to work together. And I think that people in Wales expect that, and deserve that even. That after an election, if the people of Wales haven't said quite clearly who they want as the one main party, if there has to be then parties working together, then that's what the people of Wales have voted for. And so it'll be on the shoulders of those leaders of all the political parties to see whether they can work together, if that turns out to be the case after the results.
Ellen Jones, thank you very much. Well, results for the Ceredigion constituency not expected now until around 7 o'clock.
We are still waiting, and we will continue to wait. Jess, thanks very much. Well, we may not even get those results for when we go on air for Wales at 6, but maybe we'll be able to bring you those when we're back here in the studio, when I'm back here in the studio with Adrian at 9 o'clock this evening, because I think a lot of this is still going to be playing out late this evening. Well, that was Jess Main there in Ceredigion talking to Senedd veteran and presiding officer Ellen Jones. Very much what was coming across there was that she's not taking anything for granted at this stage. We can travel north now to speak to Carol Green, and we've talked a lot this afternoon already about those Welsh Conservative target seats, particularly in the northeast, and whether that red wall is going to crumble in any way. And I think one man who is going to say, hopefully, yes, it will, is Mark Isherwood, who Carol Green is talking to for us this afternoon, and currently a regional member of the Senedd in North Wales. Carol.
Well, Andrea, we're bang on the border here. 2 counts here, Delyn and Allen Deeside. We're close up to the English border, but it seems the pattern may not be following in Wales. Now, Mark, you're the Conservative candidate for Delyn and you're top of the Conservative list for this region. Let's look at that region. What's going on? What are you hearing?
Well, it's a roller coaster, isn't it? We woke up this morning hearing about Hartlepool and wondering whether the red wall collapse would extend into North Wales. Thus far, we're hearing mixed pictures. A possible recount in the Vale of Clwyd, where the Conservatives were narrowly in the lead on the first count. Victory in Montgomeryshire, not very far away, with a very incredible result. Russell George, my friend, hanging on and growing, I think, with 48% of the vote. And yet we hear that Aberconwy is on tenterhooks because Plaid have put in a strong showing. And in Delyn, well, it's not over till the fat lady sings. Labour may have just held on, we don't know. Unfortunately, the turnout overall still remains below 50%. And we've still got a job collectively to do to help people in North East Wales understand how important the Welsh Government is to their lives and how the decisions it takes directly affect them in so many key areas.
But if we cast our minds back to the beginning of the campaign and those polls, you would never have thought it would be a recount in the Vale of Clwyd. You would have thought, you know, you'd be taking that this time around. It's close, isn't it?
Well, those were national swings, and there are a lot of local factors at play in these elections, and certainly in Delyn, I know with colleagues elsewhere, many of the issues that people have been raising with us are not actually national issues, they're very localised issues. The effect of Anne Jones choosing to retire as the incumbent Labour member.
But normally that would be a minus, if you like, for the sitting party. That changeover of candidates doesn't usually serve them well.
Well, no, it doesn't. But at the same time, Labour have a strong support base and an active team in the Vale. But we're pleased to hear that we actually won on the first count, following the lead of James Davies in the general election. We now have to keep our fingers crossed and hope that we may have done the double there.
Did you expect Aberconwy to be so close?
I've been hearing rumours that Plaid Cymru were putting up a very strong fight, and in my time in the Senedd, we've seen a Labour member, we've seen a Plaid Cymru member, and then of course my colleague Jonathan Saunders has been an excellent Welsh Conservative member. But it's always been a three-cornered race in that seat, far more than any, I think, of the other North Wales seats.
But during COVID, they've had a very different voice, haven't they? You know, really in that area. Llandudno's a big town there in Aberconwy. They've not necessarily been right behind the cautious approach of Labour and Mark Drakeford. So you'd expect that to work well for you?
Well, you would have imagined so. Obviously, I measure my experience from my postbox, and I've been inundated daily with emails from people suffering or complaining about the consequence of Mark Drakeford's decisions, particularly individuals who couldn't get their hospital treatment, for example, or businesses that couldn't get the support they need. But of course, people who aren't in trouble don't contact you.
But it's not transferred into votes for you. Why not? They've not come across in the numbers you were clearly expecting and hoping for.
Well, as I say, it's not over to the fat lady sings, and I don't know what the result's going to be in Aberconwy. I hope that Janet is victorious because she deserves it, and Aberconwy deserves to have a good Welsh Conservative member fighting for them. But I can't forecast what's going to happen.
Finally and briefly, a word on Wrexham. On your target list, do you think it'll go blue this time?
I've not heard very much. All I've heard is it could be close. Obviously, Leslie Griffiths, the local Labour member, been there a long time, the Welsh Government Minister, who has a strong personal following. But we took the seat in the general election in 2019 with Sarah Atherton, who's been a very strong local MP. So it's all to play for, but I'm not going to forecast to you now what's going to happen.
Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, as Mark says, they're all to play for, and we're expecting the Delyn and Alyn and Deeside counts to be through by tea time, so we should be able to bring you those before we're off air at 5.
Let's hope so, Carol. Thank you very much. Well, Mark Isherwood there talking about Aberconwy particularly, sounding a little bit nervous about the challenge from Plaid Cymru there, and also mentioning Wrexham at the end there and saying that seat could be close, and that's a key Tory target, so I suppose he would say that. Let's speak to Adrian now and get his thoughts on what Mark's just said and the analysis particularly of what's going on in North Wales, as Carol reflected.
I think he's being particularly positive about it. You've been talking about the Vale of Clwyd recount, Vale of Clwyd area that covers places like Rhyl and St Asaph, and the recount there, I'm told the Conservatives are ahead going into it, but clearly it's tight. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a recount. That tells us two things. One, that's a ray of sunshine, possible ray of sunshine for the Conservatives. Two, less cheerful for them. It suggests that a better than expected result for Labour across the north and might put seats like Wrexham and Delyn out of reach for the Conservatives. So not quite the good news that they're hoping for, but there might be a little chink of sunshine there. A couple of other issues that I wanted to pick up on. One, we're gradually getting the turnout figures as they come through, and it looks like it's slightly up, not massively up, but slightly up. So we'll be paying close attention to that, find out what that means.
About 45% last time around.
That's right, and it looks like it's there or it's slightly increased. But big question, what about 16 and 17-year-old voters? Have they turned out much? And we'll be looking into the figures to see if we can find out that.
Leaving me wanting more there, Adrian.
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it?
And in the Wheel of Fortunes, we're still waiting for the fortunes to be told, aren't we?
Forget about it for now.
I won't go there for now then, Adrian. Where we can go, though, is to the Senedd and to rejoin Ellie Pitt, who is there with members of each of the main parties with their reaction to what's been happening so far this afternoon, and to lots of the speculation we're hearing around different seats, and particularly just now around what Mark Isherwood was saying about Aberconwy. It would be interesting to see the reaction of Plaid Cymru to that. Ellie, what are you hearing over there?
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, welcome back to the Senedd, where lots of the candidates across Wales will be waiting nervously to find out if they've secured their seat here for the next Senedd term. I'm joined by Faye Jones, the Conservative MP, as well as Hywel Williams, the Plaid Cymru MP, and Anna McMorran, the Labour MP, to talk about what we've been hearing over the last hour or so. And let's go straight sort of geographically to the north, but here to you, Faye. And from the Conservatives' perspective, what are you reading into when it comes to that recount in the Vale of Clwyd?
I think that's really optimistic. Too early to say. It's looking really tight up there, but we're quite excited. The WhatsApp is buzzing with excitement about Vale of Clwyd and also Wrexham. Two seats that we won at the 2019 general election. I have to pay tribute to my colleague Sarah Afton, who has done a fantastic job up there. So if that does come off and we do get those 2 seats, that's a real endorsement of those results back in 2019.
But doesn't the recount suggest that it's very close, and so even if you have won, it's very narrow up there and not quite the victory you were expecting?
Well, it is so close. We don't know. We don't know how tight it is. And of course, we've had Anne Jones standing down, who has been a member of the Senedd for 20 years with a large personal following, and it is, notionally Labour's stronghold. So I'm expecting it to be tight. I'm expecting all races to be tight. But no, we're optimistic.
Let's bring in Anna McMorran then for Labour on the other side, fighting to keep hold of those north seats like Wrexham. And the seat we've just been speaking about. How concerned are you about the red wall crumbling down?
Well, look, we always knew going into this that this was going to be a difficult election, and that is the case. But the very fact that it's going to a recount shows how close it is. This was the Conservatives' top target seat, and it is close. So we'll see. There's got to see how it plays out, yet to see results coming in.
Is there a particular seat that at which point you're going to start really worrying or opening the bottles of champagne?
No, I think, look, this whole campaign has been fought on positivity, on a strong record from the Welsh Labour government and what they've delivered since 1999 here in the Bay, and that has been really positive and received positively on the doorsteps. And I think that's what we want to see going forward. And whatever happens, I am confident that we will return a strong contingent of Labour MSs here.
I want to turn now to Plaid. And Hywel Williams, you're a Plaid MP. I mean, of all the elections here in Wales, this was going to be the one where Plaid really came through, wasn't it? I mean, we've seen Wales be really strong in its decision-making around devolution and the way that it's handled the pandemic, with sort of seats up for grabs. But your colleagues are quite subdued, and over the last hour we've been hearing from them around Wales. Is that where you stand, or are you hoping for a better outcome?
I think in the longer term, the momentum is on our side, and we've seen the growth in support for independence, for example, and the Yes Cymru. That sort of thing is, I think, quite apart from the peculiar circumstances of this election where we haven't been able to knock doors. It's one of our strengths, given that we don't get virtually any coverage at all in the UK papers, and so we always have depended on knocking doors, and we haven't been able to do it. That might sound like a bit of
I was going to say, you
searching
conceding
for
already
excuses.
now? Or?
But I'm just being honest with you and explaining what the circumstances of this peculiar COVID election have been like.
Well, it has been a COVID election, hasn't it? Do you think the independence message was the right strategy, the right one to go down?
Well, I think we have the independence message, but also a whole host of other positive messages. We have huge ambitions for our country, obviously. And, obviously the government here in Cardiff, which has been Labour, has been very careful. We have been ambitious. Perhaps in a period of COVID, where there is such a substantial threat, people might be searching for certainty rather than wanting to launch into something new. That might be the case, but I think we have to be straight with the people of Wales, and we have a hugely ambitious programme. And hopefully we'll see some of that enacted.
It's been an election where personalities have really come to the fore, isn't it? You know, Mark Drakeford, Adam Price. Do you think people like Adam Price have done enough to put Plaid on the map and really push the Plaid agenda?
Well, I think we've been very lucky in our leaders for a very long time, from my predecessor, David Wigley, who's, if anyone is a big beast in Welsh politics still, that's David Wigley, but also Leanne Wood, who's been a superb leader during her time. And I think Adam's led from the front and has a vision for Wales, which has cut through, perhaps not as much as we would have hoped.
We've spoken quite a bit about Mark Drakeford. I can see you wanting to come in there, Anna. Do you think he's done enough, or do you think he's perhaps turned people off Welsh Labour?
Oh, look, I think Mark Drakeford has led a phenomenal campaign across Wales. And not just this campaign, he has delivered throughout this pandemic. We've just seen him come to the fore. I was out with him just recently in Cardiff and also in Milford. People swarming around, just wanting to take pictures, wanting to thank him for all of the work that he's done and the cautious approach, but the right approach. And do you know, just talking about Adam Price here, this was Adam Price, and this has been Adam Price's election to lose. I think, you know, we've not seen him come to the fore as he, at the start of the campaign, predicted, unfortunately.
I saw your face there, come on.
It's a peculiar formulation to say that the leader of the third party is going to win the election, even in these strange times that we're in.
Which is what Adam said at the beginning.
Well,
of the
I mean,
campaign.
clearly he has ambition, and one leader's caution is another leader's lack of ambition, I think. And you can see Mark Drakeford as being a cautious, careful man, and he certainly is so, and has had some success. It'd be ridiculous not to say that. But Adam shows the vision and the positive message for Wales, which will take us very much into the future.
Yeah, well, let's bring in the Conservatives now. Faye, I mean, we saw Boris Johnson come a couple of times to Wales over the last couple of weeks. Andrew R.T. Davies will have been hoping that'll have some effect. Do you think it did?
Well, let's see. He was received like a rock star in North Wales. It looked absolutely amazing up there. So we need to see what the results say. But I think, you know, going back to the conversation about Mark Drakeford and Adam Price, what has been rejected, if the results go the way that they're looking in terms of not picking up, not holding on to the Rhondda, not picking up Llanelli, independence is being rejected. And we also need to see what happens later on with abolishing the Assembly, because it's not looking like there's a huge amount of support for that. What's clear is unionism is doing well today. People in Wales want to be in a united kingdom of four strong nations.
Do you agree with that?
Well, if Montgomeryshire is any straw in the wind, the Tories won, we came second, and perhaps some of the debate in this place in the future will be framed around unionism on one side and the people who want stronger powers for this place or want independence on our side. And perhaps that's the dynamic that we will see in the future, rather than, you know, the old splits left, right, and the splits that replicate what's going on in Westminster.
Thank you all very much. I think it's clear that the results that we may or may not expect over the next few hours are sort of bringing up much bigger themes and ideas around the impact that this Senedd election will have on Wales over the next 5 years.
Ellie Pitt in the Senedd getting reaction from all the main parties there. I think it was clear from that and from what we've been talking about really over the last half an hour or so that there's a story potentially developing very much so in Wrexham, and as we know, the Vale of Clwyd going to a recount as well. So two big Tory targets there, and particularly the latter. Well, we'll definitely have a new member of the Senedd there because Anne Jones is retiring. She's standing down, so there's a battle there between Tories and Labour, but there will be a new MS. We just don't know which party it's going to be, and as I said, both of them, Wrexham and Vale of Clwyd, top Tory targets. Parties there talking up their leaderships. Mark Drakeford for his leadership during the pandemic, of course, but also the rock star effect of Boris Johnson being spoken about there. And lots of comments from Plaid Cymru, which sounded, I think it's fair to say, a little bit defeatist, talking about a peculiar COVID election and talking about, yes, the party's vision, which has cut through, but maybe not as much as we'd hoped. And I think that is a bit of a story of the afternoon as well. So as you mull all that over, maybe go and make yourselves a cup of tea. Let's go to a break. Welcome back to our results programme, bringing you all the results from the counts as we get them from across Wales. We've got reporters coming into us from all the regions across Wales. Only one result declared so far, and that's in Montgomeryshire, and that's with Russell George. The second is just coming in as we've returned from the break, actually, and that is news that Labour have held Merthyr Tydfil. So Labour have held Merthyr, and we'll speak to Hannah Thomas, who's in Ebbw Vale and looking at the Valley's seats for us this afternoon in just a little while. Let's speak to Adrian Masters, who's in the studio with me now. He'll be pleased that there's another slither of colour on the Wheel of Fortune finally this afternoon. You're looking at it with dismay, actually. But
I'm cock-a-hoop. At least we've got two, yes. This Wheel of Fortune, or cheese wheel, or whatever we're going to refer to it, represents the Senedd chamber, and all the parties are racing. They're crawling at this stage to try to get to this middle point, to try to get at least half of the 60 seats in the Senedd to be able to form a government. So we've got, what was that? Montgomeryshire. We had Montgomeryshire a little while ago, and we now just have Merthyr. And we might as well have a little look at the results, but it is a safe Labour seat, and yes, it was won by Labour. What a surprise. Yeah, so anyway, we'll drill down into the figures and see if we can tell anything from that. But that is, and at least we've got two results.
Quite interesting what we were hearing before we went to the break from the parties over in the Senedd with Ellie, and particularly from Plaid Cymru, and lots of talk around a new Welsh politics.
That's exactly what I scribbled down in my notebook, new Welsh politics. This is what Howell Williams said. And what he was thinking about was perhaps the division in future will be strong support for further devolution, further powers for the Senedd, or even independence against people who want more, want closer ties with the rest of the UK, rather than left and right. That's very interesting. I think that's a long way. We're a long way from that. But what we're looking at, and we've said this a few times now, this election in Wales is different to the results that are happening across the UK, particularly in England. So when you read the stories and you see the news about Labour doing very badly, the Conservatives doing very well, that's not what's happening here. It's important to say that. There's a different story. Maybe more complicated than that, but it is a different story.
Maybe not quite as developed as we want it to be yet. We don't know what's going to happen exactly.
Don't hurt the feelings of the Wheel of Fortune. But it is interesting because a lot of people, Howell Williams was criticising Mark Drakeford for being a bit cautious. But in some ways, Mark Drakeford has acted like a nationalist First Minister, hasn't he? Particularly during the pandemic, doing things differently, even closing the border at one stage. And so it is very difficult to see where Plaid Cymru fits into that politics. But I think a new kind of Welsh politics, the received wisdom has always been that Welsh politics is a lot more like English politics than all of us let on. Not today, very differently, I think.
And if we remember right at the beginning of the pandemic, the lockdowns were being called by the UK government, and that very rapidly changed, didn't it? And devolution did come to the fore in that respect.
Absolutely. Well, technically, at the time, the Welsh government and the Scottish government were joining forces with the UK government, but it seemed to be that the UK government was, yes, calling the shots on that. I think the way that people have become aware of devolution, and it's fair to say, and that some people want to get rid of the Senedd altogether, and particularly as a result of the pandemic, think that devolution has been disastrous for Wales, which is why we're going to ignore the cheese wheel and we'll look at these boxes, because in these regional seats, we might start to see some of these smaller parties, particularly the one that's called Abolish the Welsh Assembly, but others who also want to do away with.
And that did show in the most recent poll, didn't it?
They could have 2 seats and maybe even a bit more. They haven't done at all well. They don't seem to be doing at all well in the constituencies, which may bode well. There is some suspicion that the Conservatives successfully managed to stop their voters going out to vote for them. Looks as though they might have stopped them voting for the Conservatives as well, but that's another story. So we will be paying a very close eye on that, because that will tell us the direction of Welsh politics for the next 5, 10, 15 years.
But there's a bit of a but there, because we probably won't get those results till quite a lot later on in the day.
Let's not let results get
Sorry, but we probably should mention it. If you're expecting that to come anytime soon, you might be disappointed. But what we do have is a result in Merthyr.
We do.
That's been held by Labour. Let's go to speak to Hannah Thomas now, who's in Ebbw Vale for us. She's keeping an eye on all of the seats in that area, particularly in the valleys, Blaenau Gwent, Monmouth, Torfaen, Caerphilly, the Newports as well. She's all over the place, but she's also keeping an eye on that Merthyr result. And she has a guest with her this afternoon in the shape of Alan Davies, who is the Labour candidate for Blaenau Gwent. And of course, that could be an interesting seat in the mix of everything this afternoon as well, couldn't it, Hannah?
Yeah, well, we thought it was going to be an interesting seat, at least, Andrea. As you say, there's some movement now in the valleys. We've just had that Merthyr declaration. Labour hold the seat there. And we have Alan Davies here from Welsh Labour here in Blaenau Gwent. Alan, you've got more of a smile on your face than perhaps you expected to have. 5 years ago, you were run very close. Doesn't look like you were run that close this time around.
I have to say I'm enjoying this count a little more than perhaps I enjoyed the count 5 years ago. I think that's fair enough. But it's important to let this process run its course and to understand what the people are saying to us over these few days. And I hope that not only will I be re-elected later this afternoon, but the Welsh Labour government will also be re-elected as the weekend pans out.
We're expecting the official declaration in around sort of an hour or so. An hour or so ago, we had the confirmation that around 40% of people turned out to vote here in Blaenau Gwent. In Merthyr Tydfil, it was 35%. In Caerphilly, it was 44%. So not great turnout figures, Alan. Is Welsh Labour getting lucky here, relying on their core voters, those postal voters, to get them through? And actually, there's a lot of voter apathy going on.
I don't think luck comes into it at all. But, you know, all of us would want to see turnout figures of 80%, 90%. I think that's common across all political parties. But, you know, this has been an election held under extraordinary circumstances. You know, when dissolution took place, when we left the Bay to have this election, we didn't even know if we'd be able to knock on doors and canvass people. You know, we've all been fighting an election under the most difficult and unprecedented conditions. And so, yeah, I pay tribute to everybody who's taken part in this election. And I think all of us need to reflect on how do we engage with our democracy. I think this is a matter for yourselves as broadcaster as well as ourselves as politicians to look at how we enable an election to take place which isn't just safe in the way it has been over the last few weeks, but also engages people and drives up that turnout figures that you've been quoting.
What about you personally, Alan? Because, of course, just before Christmas, we had that sort of debacle where yourselves and other Conservative members of the Senedd were involved in this sort of incident, which you said didn't break the rules, but maybe was against the spirit of the rules as far as sort of drinks consumed in the Senedd bar were concerned. There were grave fears that you would lose your seat over this. That doesn't seem to have happened. How have you managed to escape?
I don't think I've escaped anything. You know, that implies that, you know, I was actually guilty of something. And that's not been the case, of course. But doesn't that reflect the obsessions of the bubble and the reality of the people? And I think that's one of the issues that we need to discuss, you know, not just myself as an individual and yourselves as broadcasters, but all of us as a nation. Because one of the things that I really want us to spend more time discussing is policy. And I want us to talk about taxation in the future. You know, there's been no reporting of taxation policy, no reporting about our debates on the economy, on how we recover from COVID. And, you know, when I was knocking on doors over this last month, people have been talking to me about the future of their towns, of their communities, of their families, talking about how we as a government can invest in their futures and invest in the future of all of us here. And that is what people have been telling us over the last few weeks, and I think it's what you'll see reflected when we have the declaration here in the next few minutes.
As you talk about sort of maybe a better night for Labour, a better day for Labour than you were perhaps expecting, but maybe not getting that majority that everybody wants, what about a coalition with Plaid now? Are you up for it?
Look, we've got to listen to what the people say. I think it is the supreme arrogance of any politician to start talking about how you will govern when you haven't even won your seat. And, you know, for me, my focus over this last few weeks has been the conversation that I've been having with the people of Blaenau Gwent. And, you know, I was knocking on doors last night, talking to people about trying to persuade people to vote for me and the rest of it, talking to people about what they wanted to see in the future. And over the coming days, I'll be reflecting on what they've been saying to me over the last few weeks, and then how we deliver on that. But, you know, the shape of government in the future is a matter for us to discuss when we know the result of this election.
Just briefly, how has campaigning gone for you? Has it been sort of a dignified election? Some people turning out to make sure they sort of cast their vote and sort of embrace this campaign?
Yeah, look, I've thoroughly enjoyed it, you know. I'm one of these curious people who actually does enjoy the canvassing and the campaigning part of an election, you know. It's a great privilege to be able to spend time, you know, knocking on somebody's door, somebody you've never met, you don't know who they are, you don't know their backgrounds, you don't know what their circumstances are, and then have a conversation with them about what they want from me and what they want from politics.
Great.
And that is something I've really enjoyed over these last few weeks.
Great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, Alan, but we will expect a declaration in about maybe an hour or so.
Well, as you say, Hannah, Alan Davis speaking to you there and sounding very confident, although the declaration is an hour away, sounding very confident that he's done well for Labour in Blaenau Gwent. Interestingly, one of the figures there from Merthyr, we've had it confirmed that Dawn Bowden has held the Merthyr seat for Labour, but the turnout's quite low there, 35%. Some of the other turnouts we've seen 50% in Montgomeryshire, and then some of the other figures coming in between. So there's really no consistency that we can see at the moment in the figures for the turnout. To give you an idea and a comparison, in the 2016 Senedd election, it was around the 45% mark. So that's going to be interesting as well. And we were talking to Adrian a little earlier on about how the first-time voters for those 16 and 17-year-olds who are going to be voting this time, how that might play out in terms of turnout and what effect that might have. So we'll keep an eye on that for you. Now, though, let's head to speak to Dean Thomas in Swansea. He's keeping an eye on those seats for us down there. And, Dean, I think you're with Di Lloyd, who was elected, of course, in 2016 for the regional seat for South Wales West.
Yeah, I am. We're about to speak to him. He's going to give us a little announcement. But just before that, you can see behind me, the counting tables have been set up. Counting hasn't started yet, but we're expecting that to start soon. But we've had the turnout for the South Wales West region, and that's at 41%. But as I just mentioned there, I'm here now with a veteran of Welsh politics, Plaid Cymru candidate, Dr Di Lloyd. You're standing in Swansea West. You're not on the regional list this time round. How confident are you about contesting Swansea West?
Well, always confident. I've come a close second here a couple of times before over the years. Obviously, when you were a lad, obviously, Dean, looking at you there, I've stood and come pretty close to winning back in 99 and 2003. But obviously, my health dictated what I was doing. I've had a couple of cardiac arrests in the last couple of years. I've got a pacemaker. I cannot drive. So it wasn't really feasible going again for the region in terms of looking after 7 constituencies. And really, you have to have a car to be, you know, in more than one meeting in an evening. You can't rely on a bus to get you to 3 different meetings in the same night. But I could look after my home constituency using buses and public transport, and so that's what I've gone for, really.
30 years in politics, 18th time you stood. If you weren't successful today, would that spell the end of your political career?
Yeah, it would. I think, being realistically, you've got to always look to broaden your horizons. I mean, my health means I've had to give up my general practice.
We're just going to leave Dean at Thomas in Swansea with Di Lloyd. We'll return to them when we can this afternoon to bring you some news from the Vale of Clwyd. A seat we've been talking about all afternoon, and as you can see there, live pictures from the Vale of Clwyd seat as the candidates are gathered on the stage. Let's hear what's being said.
Reform UK 552. Davies, Gareth Lloyd, Welsh Conservative Party candidate, Ymgeisydd Plaid Geidwaddol Cymru, 10,792. Davies, Lisa J. Welsh Liberal Democrats, put recovery first. Democratiaid Rhyddfrydol Cymru, Adfywio Flynn Oriaeth, 782. McClellan, Jason Matthew, Welsh Labour, Cladder Cymru, 10,426. Swingler Glen, Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, 2,972. Thomas David Lee, Independent, 529. Directly Riven Dadscan Board. Therefore, I give public notice that Gareth Lloyd Davis, wedi iawn Ethel Fel, aelodol Senedd a gyfer etholaeth Dyffryn Clwyd, duly elected as the member of the Senedd for the Vale of Clwyd constituency.
Now that the Tories have gained. We're going to hear from the winning candidate now. Excuse me.
The counting staff, the security today, Devonshire County Council, and also the leisure centre staff, polling station staff for a safe election and a safe count here today in Denbigh. I also want to thank my amazing campaign team who've been with me all the way through the campaign over the months and weeks. And thanks for supporting me all the way. I also want to thank Anne Jones, who has stepped down at this election after 22 years of serving the Vale of Clwyd constituency with distinction. But most of all, I want to thank the people of the Vale of Clwyd for putting their trust in me, and I look forward to getting to work in the constituency, which is my home, and I'll be proud to represent. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
So there we've just been hearing from Gareth Davis. Now, Gareth Davis, big story really this afternoon. The Conservatives gain the Vale of Clwyd. That's the key target seat for the Welsh Conservatives. They will be over the moon with that result. And the winner there, the new member of the Senedd for the Vale of Clwyd, is Gareth Davis. He is an NHS physiotherapist, so he has gained that seat from the Labour Party. And just to remind you that whatever happened in the Vale of Clwyd, we were going to get a new MS, because as you just heard there, Gareth Davis was paying tribute to Anne Jones, who was standing down for the Labour Party. But we often talk about that area of North Wales, which is a target for the Tory party. And many of those so-called red wall seats fell in 2019 during the general election to the Tories. And there's been lots of speculation that some of those seats might fall to the Tories this time around. And indeed, we've just seen breaking news this afternoon that has happened in the Vale of Clwyd. Adrian, this is really significant.
Look how close it is there. Majority of 366, but that's extremely close. Too close for comfort for the Conservatives. Still a big blow for Labour, but I think the overall pattern is that that Labour has held up more, its vote has held up much more strongly across the north than the Conservatives would like, which means it's going to make it increasingly difficult for the Conservatives to win any of those other red wall seats that we talk about across the north. Just had a text from a Conservative. We've got one over the line. Which is probably about as good as they can expect in there. I should say that, I mean, the Conservatives have been on a roller coaster for this, because all the signs were that this was going to be something of a breakthrough election for them, particularly with those seats in the north, traditional Labour voting seats that looked like they were going to turn Conservative, and saw visits from people like Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson, and a lot of attention put on them. It hasn't worked out. But
well, the Conservative Party, speaking to Ellie earlier on, and talking about the rock star effect of Boris Johnson visiting those seats in the north. And
you can't deny that. You see it. I mean, it's undoubtedly there. People do seem to like him and enjoy his presence in there, but it hasn't. While it has worked, clearly has worked elsewhere in the UK, in Hartlepool and in councils up and down England, it hasn't worked for the Welsh Conservatives. So there'll be some internal questioning going on.
Yes, we'll talk a bit more about that. But we were talking, weren't we, last night to Simon Hart on the programme building up to this, and he was talking about the pizzazz and charisma of Boris Johnson. And I was asking him whether the pizzazz and charisma cancelled out all those allegations and scandals that we've heard about in recent weeks. Well, this is an interesting talking point as we get this result in, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, what we're going to have to ask, because what we were looking at, or what we thought we were looking at, was the Welsh Conservative, Conservatives in Wales not suffering as a result of all those controversies. Have they? I'm not sure yet, or whether it's been a uniquely Welsh election and it's actually been a verdict on the Welsh Conservatives, for one, and on Welsh Labour's record, particularly Mark Draper's handling of the pandemic. And I guess that's what we'll find out in the coming hours.
Well, this is potentially one headline amongst many this afternoon, but the breaking news this afternoon is that Conservatives gain the Vale of Clwyd. Let's let all that sink in. Go and put the kettle on. Come back, put your feet up. We'll have more after the break. Good afternoon. If you are just joining us, you might be expecting to tune into your favourite game show, or perhaps Judge Rhondda, but you're joining us instead with ITV Cymru Wales and Wales Decides, bringing you all the latest as the results come in from counts across the country in the Senedd election for 2021. And to bring you up to speed, just before the break, we had a declaration in the Vale of Clwyd and a big story there because the Conservatives gain that seat. Now, the Conservatives have had their eye on many seats in that area since the general election in 2019 for the UK, and they have broken through in the Vale of Clwyd. Gareth Davies wins that seat by a very narrow majority, we should say, a majority of just around 300 votes. It's the first party gain of the election results so far. We also know that the Conservatives have held on to Montgomeryshire. Russell George will keep his seat. The results also show there has been a substantially increased majority there, and there's been a 50% turnout for the constituency. Very mixed, the turnouts across the country that we've been seeing so far, from 35 in Merthyr, for example, through to 50 in Montgomeryshire. So really mixed, no consistency really on the turnout. Labour has held on to the party's claim to Merthyr Tydfil and Rumney. Dawn Bowden has managed to keep hold of her seat in that constituency, with the party taking a 10,000 vote lead there. It's been reported that the constituency had a 35% turnout, as I said a little earlier. Well, despite Labour's claims that they've taken the Rhondda, we do not have official results verified there yet. Plaid Cymru has released a statement saying it is proud of its positive campaign based on its ambition to create a fairer, greener and independent Wales. We can see pictures there of Adam Price, the leader of Plaid Cymru. It also says campaigning during a pandemic and with an unprecedented focus on the London parties made the context challenging. So you could say quite defeatist language coming from the Plaid Cymru camp this afternoon. Well, let's go to Jess Main now in Ceredigion to get some reaction there to some of the breaking news we've been hearing this afternoon. It's a relatively safe Plaid seat there, Jess. How are you this afternoon?
Yes, Andrea, well, things are pretty quiet here as we wait. But as you just said, we just heard the news about the Conservatives gaining their key target seat in the Vale of Clwyd. And I'm pleased to say I've got one of the Tory candidates to get some reaction. Amanda, what's your reaction to this breaking news we've just had?
Yeah, I'm so pleased to see that Gareth has won Vale of Clwyd. He's a really positive candidate, has run a really upbeat campaign about the issues. So yeah, I'm really pleased for him as a person as well as for the party.
Was it unexpected? Is that what you expected?
Yeah, well, it was obviously one of our target seats, and you never know what's going to happen on the day, and I gather that it did get quite close. I think there's 300 votes or something in it. But yeah, brilliant results, and hopefully that's a sign of things to come for over the next few hours.
Yeah, and obviously you're standing here in Ceredigion. Obviously, we've already talked about it being a relatively safe seat for Plaid and Ellen Jones, but you're hopeful of your chances of coming second?
Well, Ceredigion used to be a two-horse race between Plaid and the Liberal Democrats, and then in 2019 I stood as the general election candidate, and we came a good second. Didn't know whether that was mainly down to Brexit or not, but I'm hopeful that we're going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, replicate that at least tonight. And going back to 2016, we came fourth then, so hopefully we're going to do a lot better than that today, and that's a really good result for us here. So
a good result, but things are still looking quite a struggle for the Tories, aren't they?
I wouldn't say a struggle. I think Wales is a mixed picture across the country, and within the different areas there's different issues that are important to people. I think to go from fourth to hopefully second within such a short space of time shows that there's a real change in direction for the Conservatives over in West Wales. I'll wait to see what happens in the other seats, but if we look at the Carmarthen seat from the 2019 election, we did really well then, so I'm hoping we'll do well there today as well. I don't have any intel on that, but I'm hoping we will. So yeah, things are on the up in West Wales for the Conservative Party.
And one of the sort of hot topics of this election will be Brecon and Radnorshire. Your party is confident, I understand.
Yes, so yeah, we've obviously got our sights on Brecon and Radnorshire, with the incumbent standing down for the Liberal Democrats and James Evans standing for the Conservatives. James has run a fantastic campaign. He's a local guy, hard-working, he's a Powys County councillor, and I've been on the campaign trail with him during this period, and there was a really positive response there, even down in Gunlight, which is more of a Labour area. It's got Labour councillors. People were stopping to say, hi James, we're voting for you. So I'm really hopeful that that's how things will play out for the Conservatives.
Amanda, thanks very much. Well, that will be a pretty significant seat to nab if they can do it.
Jess Main speaking to Amanda Jenner, the Conservative candidate there in Ceredigion. Thank you very much this afternoon for those insights. And Amanda there talking about a real change of direction for the Conservatives in West Wales, and also speculating about her hopes for Brecon and Radnorshire with the candidate there who's standing for the Welsh Conservatives. He's James Evans, currently a Lib Dem seat, and Kirsty Williams is standing down there, so there will be a new MS, a new member of the Senedd, and we shall see whether the Lib Dems can hold on to that or not, how much of that is a personal vote, or whether the Tories indeed do have a chance, as Amanda is hoping with their candidate James Evans. So another seat to watch this afternoon. Well, we can now hear from First Minister Mark Drakeford, who of course is contesting his seat in Cardiff West. He told ITV News that this has been an incredibly difficult election in terms of turnout, and that people have been nervous about going to the polling station due to the coronavirus pandemic. But we were hearing yesterday about lots of queues at the polling stations. He also says a Labour majority in the Senedd would be the best result ever. Let's take a listen. I should just say that he was speaking before we heard the results from the Vale of Clwyd, which was the Conservative gain there. Let's hear from First Minister Mark Drakeford.
Well, truthfully, I think it's going very slowly, because verification is taking a long time, and this is very early on in the process. From the front line, our People are reporting some promising returns in some parts of Wales, but we'll be placing no reliance on things until we're further in the process and have got some real results to look at. Well, I think this was a very difficult election in terms of turnout. I met people who are nervous about going to the polling station, anxious about not having been outside their own homes for many weeks or months. We've seen queues at polling stations here in Wales with people going home not being able to vote because it's taken so long. So in all the circumstances, and given the restraints on campaigning the coronavirus has created to have even marginally increased turnout in Wales, I think it's not uncreditable.
You say people might have been concerned to go to polling stations. Did the Welsh Government do enough to reassure people that it was safe to carry out their democratic rights?
Well, I think we did everything we could. We certainly encouraged people to take postal votes. If they did feel any hesitation in going to the polling station, and postal vote numbers are up across Wales, but knocking doors in every part of Wales, you meet a lot of people who have spent an awful lot of the last year being very anxious about their own health, what coronavirus means for them, and there's no doubt at all that that will have played some part in people's participation in the election.
This was an election where independence was on the ballot. It was talked about more than perhaps at any other Senedd election, but there's no evidence to say that Plaid Cymru is making any real inroads, potentially even taking Blaenau Gwent's seat in the Rhondda. Is this the end of the issue? Do you think that independence as a debate is over for the time being?
Well, I'm sure it's not over as a debate, but I can tell you absolutely truthfully, in the hundreds of doors that I knocked and conversations that I had, not a single person mentioned the word independence to me. So for some people it's a real focus, it consumes their idea of the future of Wales, but on the doorstep it really didn't run.
The way the polls looked a few months ago, you could never have imagined to be in this situation, bucking the trend we're seeing in England. How pleased are you to see that Labour appears to be holding on?
Well, I started this campaign answering questions as to why this was going to be Labour's worst ever result, a poll prediction of 22 seats. The campaign never felt like that to me. We've had a fantastic and energetic campaign with hundreds of people involved and real enthusiasm on the doorstep. So that never seemed to me to genuinely reflect the mood here in Wales, but we don't have results yet. So we'll reserve our enthusiasm and excitement for when the time comes that we've got real results in the ballot box.
And finally, it looks as if you'll be the First Minister for the time being, for the foreseeable future. Does that mean that it's business as usual for people in Wales? They'll have to wait 5 years for change?
No, there's an enormous amount of change going to happen in the next 5 years with Labour's ambitious manifesto, with all the ideas that we have for the future. Where there will be continuity will be in handling the still present pandemic here in Wales. The careful, cautious way in which we have gone about it. People in Wales, if I am First Minister, can be reassured that everything we have achieved together will not be thrown away by a change of course in that policy area.
And are you going to get a majority today?
Well, much too early to say. We'll watch the results very carefully. It would be the best result ever. No party has ever had a majority in the Senedd. But I am looking forward to an afternoon that is a good bit better than the predictions with which we started this campaign.
First Minister Mark Drakeford speaking to us. Well, a good bit better probably won't include the result that we've heard from the Vale of Clwyd, where the Conservatives have made an important gain there. Mark Drakeford won't be pleased with that, but he says at the moment he's placing no reliance on things, and he talks about it being a difficult election. That's something we're hearing from all the parties, and Plaid certainly have reiterated how challenging they have seen the situation with COVID. Whether or not it's affected whether people have voted or how they voted is something really that we've going to see play out throughout the afternoon, and we don't really know enough to be able to judge that yet. So we've seen Mark Drakeford there. We've heard from the First Minister. He's contesting his Cardiff West seat. We can talk to Rob Osborne now, who's covering that count for us, as well as other seats across Cardiff and the all-important seat in the Rhondda, which we've spoken a lot about this afternoon. And we spoke to you a little earlier on, and we were talking, weren't we, about Chris Bryant declaring that, but we haven't had a result from the Rhondda yet, so that was speculation. What update can you give us, Rob?
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of the race to declare, the Rhondda is further down the line than Cardiff, any of the Cardiff seats are, because they're still verifying the results here, so we'll be lucky to get anything before we come off air at 5. So tune back in at 9, and of course at Wales at 6. Look, listening to Mark Drakeford there, and this is his count. We haven't seen him here yet, so this is the first we've seen and heard from him. He sounds like a man who's quite happy. And I suspect what he is thinking right now is, do I have enough to go it alone? As a minority administration, but that's happened before. And we've heard calls from people like Chris Bryant who've said that he probably should go it alone rather than strike a deal with, say, Plaid Cymru. Look, he was also asked there about change. And one thing that we do know, that if Mark Drakeford, as we suspect, will be returned as First Minister, there will be a big change in the next 5 years. And that is, he won't be the First Minister for the next 5 years. He has said a number of times, including on Sharp End, that he will be stepping down around halfway through the next term, next 2.5 years. So that raises questions for Welsh Labour. Was this a unique election, the COVID factor? So it didn't really matter what the party leader's position was politically. It was determined on events over the last year, because Mark Drakeford is a man of the left. So for his successors, or likely possible successors, like Vaughan Gethin, whose count is next door, Jeremy Miles down in Neath, maybe Ken Skates up in Clwyd South, and others, they'll be saying, do we need to stick to the same approach that Mark Drakeford has had in this election, or do we need to rethink things? Do we need to move the party in a different direction? Welsh Labour has been written off many, many times, and somehow they always seem to outperform expectations. And if Mark Drakeford can win places like the Rhondda, and he can hold on to places like the Vale of Glamorgan and Senedd, then although he may have losses, like we have seen, I think he'll be rather relieved. As I was saying, we expect him here at some point, but when, we don't know. Maybe this time next year. The way it's going, that's how it feels like.
Well, you've certainly jumped ahead a lot there. Not only are we past talking about results or coalitions, we've been talking about who the next First Minister is going to be, and you've got a whole list of candidates there, Rob, so thanks very much for that. Throwing ourselves right into the future. You mentioned the Vale of Glamorgan there. Can Labour hold on to the Vale of Glamorgan? Well, let's see what the situation is in the Vale of Glamorgan now with Charonpreet in Barry. Charonpreet.
Well, Andrea, you did hear from Rob there how important the Vale of Glamorgan is for Mark Drakeford's chances going forward. Still a long way until we get the result here, but what I can tell you is the voter turnout results. Voter turnout here of 54%, which, as we've heard, is much higher than many of the other constituencies across Wales. Now, voter turnout is traditionally very high here in the Vale of Glamorgan. Last year it was 53%, and that little uptick of 1% could well be because of the year we've just lived through and how important politics has been during the COVID crisis. So lots of votes. The question is, which way are they going to go? Voters really face a choice of two contrasts here. There's Jane Hutt, who's been here from Labour since 1999, or on the other side, there's Matt Smith, a very new face from the Conservatives. Now, as we say, Jane Hutt's been here since 1999, since the beginning of devolution, and one of the Conservatives' key campaign messages throughout this campaign has been that Labour's been in power for too long and it's time for a change. It's time to shake things up. Now, the result that we get here in the Vale of Glamorgan will be an excellent measure of how well that message is landing with the public and whether they're going to benefit from the same popularity that they've seen over the border with the by-elections in England. Still, long way to go. Time will tell.
Time will tell. Charonpreet's in Barry, waiting to hear about the results in the Vale of Glamorgan, a key target seat for the Welsh Conservatives, as was the other Vale, the Vale of Clwyd. Let's get reaction to that now. Carol Green is in Deeside for us, keeping an eye on all those counts in North Wales. But just to remind you that a little earlier on we had that declaration of the vote in the Vale of Clwyd, and the Conservatives have gained that seat. This is big news, isn't it, Carol? What's the feeling like there since we heard that result?
Well, it is big news because every gain for any party is a a big win, a story. But for many people, I live in the Vale of Clwyd, and it's perhaps not a surprise. Perhaps the biggest surprise is the margin. 366 votes, so very, very close. Now, this is a seat, a Westminster seat, which has swapped hands between the Tories and Labour the last few elections, and it's been a Conservative target for the Senedd, a top target. So we were expecting it, really. It isn't a great surprise, but what's really interesting is, what does this Conservative win in the Vale of Clwyd, by that small margin, a recount, tell us about what might happen along this North East Wales coast, these key seats which are so important to the overall makeup of the Senedd and who governs Wales in the years to come. So, Delyn, that was where we're standing now. That's the towns of, Flint, Mould, a Conservative target at a stretch. But looking what's happened in the Vale of Clwyd, that doesn't seem to be on now. So Labour's vote really does seem to be holding up here in North Wales, although they've lost the Vale of Clwyd, which will be a huge disappointment to them, particularly because, Anne Jones has served that constituency for so long, and they've lost it on that changeover of candidate. But it won't have come as a surprise. What it will mean looking along the coast, the Conservatives have still got their eye on Wrexham. I'm hearing that the Conservatives and Plaid are doing well there. So it looks like Labour may miss out in Wrexham, but overall, in this North Wales border area, the story on the Welsh side of the border is very different to the Labour story on the English side of the border, where they've been having a very torrid time.
Potentially a fascinating story unfolding in North Wales. Carol Green, for now, thank you very much indeed. Adrian, quite a lot I want to ask you, really. First of all, talking about the Vale of Clwyd, and comparing it to what's going on in the UK and Hartlepool, is there a comparison? Is there a parallel? And Wrexham, is Leslie Griffiths going to be nervous now?
Well, let me talk about Wrexham, because I've just had a text saying that Wrexham looks like it's going to be a comfortable Labour hold, but with a strong Plaid Cymru showing. That's still not official, but that will be another sign of hope for Labour, and another bitter disappointment for the Conservatives, who wanted to take that, have taken it at a Westminster level, but haven't. Rob was saying just now, wasn't he, don't write off Welsh Labour. You can never overestimate their ability to cling on, and today looks like proving that. And you can see that even in the Vale of Clwyd, as Carol was just talking about. And I think if we can call up the statistics there, then we can show you exactly what I mean by that, because the majority, so the amount that the Conservatives won by, is just 366. So the Conservative candidate got 10,792, the Labour candidate 10,426. So rightly, as Carol was saying, the Conservatives will be celebrating the Vale of Clwyd. It is undoubtedly a good result for them. They have got that. It's one over the line. But that figure there shows the strength of the Labour vote across the north, across those red wall seats, and that's something that will cause problems in other of those northern seats for the Conservatives, and it's going to be something that they will be worried about. Welsh Labour will be cheered about.
It feels like in 5 years' time we're going to be talking about the Vale of Clwyd again, aren't we?
I have a feeling that, a Labour person texted to say we'll be back in Vale of Clwyd. I think, yes, you'll see them throwing everything at it in the coming weeks, months and years.
So it's filling up a little bit now, isn't it, our Wheel of Fortune?
Shall we look?
Should we have a quick look, see where we are now?
Oh, it's not. It's not. There's a tiny little blobs of colour over there, and there's just slivers. Look, it's going to look wonderful when it fills up. But yes, I mean, the all-important central number that they're going to need to get lots of constituencies, then see some seats on the regions, and then they're going to have to come right up there in order to be able to form a government. So we're some way off that, I'm afraid to say.
We are waiting, aren't we, patiently?
Kind of. You are.
Any other hints and whispers that you're hearing?
I've told you about Wrexham that I heard on that. We're still keeping a very close eye on Aberconwy, which is the seat that has places like Llandudno in. There is a possibility that Plaid Cymru could take that from the Conservatives. That's very much unconfirmed, but it's still an interesting rumour. And I think you were talking about earlier on, but Brecon and Radnorshire is one that looks like it could change hands too.
And Plaid Cymru would be pleased with that because elsewhere there's been some disappointment.
I think Plaid Cymru is going to have some very difficult conversations, and its leader, Adam Price, will face some very difficult questions internally because, two things were put at the centre of their campaign. One, him, very much a presidential campaign, and two, independence. No doubting where they stood, anecdotally, there were signs that it put some of the people off that had tried out Plaid Cymru in the past, such as in the Rhondda. But we'll see, and I'm sure those questions will be asked.
And we heard from Mark Isherwood a little earlier on for the Conservatives, and he was very optimistic and quite buoyed, and probably because of that result, that game for the Tories in the Vale of Clwyd. But hearing from Mark Drakeford and also hearing from Hal Williams in the Senedd a little earlier on, and a statement from them, would you agree with me that some of the language around that does sound quite defeatist, and also what Mark Drakeford was saying about a very challenging election, very difficult times, yet all parties would have faced those same difficulties in COVID, wouldn't they?
Mark Drakeford and Labour have been criticised for their caution. The manifesto was seen as very much a safety first manifesto, and although a lot of people have been praising Mark Drakeford for his caution, they were saying where's the ambition in that. So there definitely has been a note of realism, pragmatism, whatever you want to call it, defeatism, you could say that. Certainly that's the tone that is coming from Labour sources who are telling us that this was always going to be difficult for them to do. It's true the electoral system makes it very difficult for any party to gain a majority, but Labour has managed to play that system in the past. Let's not call it defeatism, let's call it realism that they're showing.
Well, it's about 20 past 4 now. So, for those who might be joining us who have just got home, maybe in from the school run or something like that, let's just remind ourselves a summary of just where we are now. We haven't had many seats declared, but let's just remind ourselves just before we go to the break of where we are.
We are waiting for nearly all of the results. They are coming. It's only a matter of time, I promise you. But it's divided in two. Remember, there's the constituencies, your very local areas around where you live, and then the regions. So you voted twice, and that's what we'll be adding up. You add all these together and you make the 60, this makes the 60 Senedd members, and we need to see at least 30, at least half of that going to one party. Looks like no one party will be able to do that. At the moment we've only had 3 results, 2 Conservative seats and 1 Labour seat, so we are keeping a very close eye on it. But the mood music that's coming from the parties is a very different story to that which is happening elsewhere in the UK, particularly in England, where the story is almost the complete opposite. Conservative success, Labour failure. In Wales, it looks like Labour hanging on and doing as well as it can be, and the Conservatives having a very disappointing night.
Yeah, it can't be read in parallel, can it? It's 2 very different scenarios, 2 very different situations, very different politics.
For Wales, don't see England.
Adrian, thank you very much. I think that's a good summary, and it brings us up to speed on where we are on the declarations this afternoon as well. If you've just got in and switched on your television, we're going to be here with you till 5 o'clock. Let's take a break now. Well, hello and welcome back to ITV Cymru Wales' coverage of the Senedd elections 2021. Very different coverage this time around because of the pandemic. Usually we'd be here overnight as the results come in, but this time it's through the afternoon, and we have had just a trickle of declarations so far, and you can see the bottom left of your screen the numbers as they stand. Let's head over to the Senedd where we can get some party reaction to what we've heard so far this afternoon. And probably one of the biggest headlines is that the Vale of Clwyd has gone to the Conservatives. Ellie, can we hear from the main party players with you this afternoon?
Yes, Andrea, thanks again. You join me now in the Senedd, where we're getting some of that political reaction to the results that we've got so far. I'm joined by Faye Jones, the Conservative MP, Hywel Williams, the Plaid Cymru MP, and Anna McMorran, the Labour MP. And I'm going to stay with you because obviously we've got that Vale of Clwyd result in now. Disappointment for you?
Well, yes, obviously, you know, the candidate there put in a tremendously positive, energetic campaign there. So obviously we're disappointed, but it was so close. And for the Tory key focus on that, Boris Johnson coming to visit, you know, to have a recount and to lose by just that small margin. And we've seen increases in Merthyr, and, you know, we're hearing some positive messages from elsewhere. But I just also want to pay real tribute to Anne Jones, who stepped down. I worked with Anne in the Welsh Government here, fantastic campaigner. So just to pay a real tribute to her.
Well, let's just remind people, so Vale of Clwyd is sort of, you know, a majority for the Conservative Party, for you, Faye, of 366. I mean, Anna's talked about it there. That's a narrow win, isn't it? You talked about Boris Johnson having the rock star effect in North Wales. Has that been translated for you?
Well, look, a win's a win. I'm not going to be churlish about that. It's not the smallest majority that's ever been in that constituency. Anne herself only won it with 92 votes a few elections back. So it is one that we have been fighting for a long time. So I do want to pay tribute to Gareth and James Davies, the Member of Parliament. Again, this backs up what happened in 2019, where voters put their trust in the Conservative Party and they've seen what a Member of Parliament can do, and now they want to do that at a Senedd level. So I think it's a really good result.
And so how confident are you for the other seats that the Conservatives are fighting for up there, you know, Wrexham and Aberconwy?
Yeah, looking close, looking tight. All of these elections are tight. You know, these are hard-fought seats, and we have been chipping away for many years. And, you know, is this the year that we're going to get them all over the line? I don't know. But, you know, it's looking close and it's still optimistic. We just need to wait for some more results now.
Yes, we do. I mean, Anna, to push that back to you, how concerned are you about, you know, this seat now setting a precedent for the others?
Well, look, it is too early to tell for the others. We'll wait and see what comes back. I just know what a fantastically positive campaign Mark Drakeford has led throughout Wales. And I think all of our candidates have shown that, our activists out there, but also the people of Wales have responded well. And we're seeing turnout up in some places. But, you know, I think as Mark Drakeford has said, this has been a difficult election. Some people have been nervous about going out to vote. Some places they've been keen to get out and vote and just get out there. But I've been out on the doorsteps and I've heard nothing but positivity for how the Welsh Labour government has led this, and also looking to the future and how Mark Drakeford is going to take us out through this pandemic, delivering the vaccine rollout, the quickest we've seen it across the UK. It's been absolutely brilliant. And we just haven't seen that from the Tories.
Go on, Faye, that's not true. I heard you just say under your breath.
It isn't true. I mean, let's remember that Mark Drakeford and the Welsh NHS wouldn't have a single vaccine to roll out if it hadn't been for the work of the UK government. I think it's important to remember that. But also, if you come to Mid Wales, Anna, there isn't this support for Mark Drakeford. They do not feel that his campaign was positive. We feel forgotten about in Mid Wales, which is why, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see those seats go Conservative later on today. So, again, this shows the difference between rural and urban Wales. Welsh Labour are not interested in anything above the heads of the Valleys Road, and I think that's what we're going to see later on today.
I mean, that's not true at all.
Wait for the results.
You know, let's wait for the results. But, you know, I think we have seen a fantastically positive campaign, but we've also seen that the Welsh Tories here refusing to condemn Johnson's horrific comments on piling up bodies. That was just appalling, and the Welsh Tories just refusing to condemn
because he never said it.
It's just
because
been,
they don't need to condemn something that he never said.
Rolling
the election
back.
is over, ladies.
Yeah,
good point.
Exactly.
Something substantive, not just attacking the Conservatives all the time.
And it's just such a shame when we need to be positive, cautious, really focused on getting through this pandemic.
Okay.
Scientifically led.
And you've spoken there about a difficult election campaign. I mean, I want to bring Hywel in now, Hywel Williams for Plaid Cymru, and that's been some of the messaging that we've already heard coming out from the party today. Is it something you echo, or are you feeling that's a little bit premature?
Well, you know, the votes have been counted in some places, not in others. We have very few results. But it's not surprising that a party that depends on knocking doors, which we do because of the lack of exposure, might find it difficult to run an election under these peculiar circumstances. But what actually matters is what happens here in terms of numbers. And I think we have run a very strong and positive campaign. We have a very detailed programme for governments and for any government, really. So that's very useful indeed, I think.
Faye made about rural and urban Wales. Do you think Plaid have been able to play into that as much as perhaps they would have done or should have done?
We're a national party. We seek to represent all parts of Wales and seek to represent the urban as well as the rural. I think that's a false dichotomy. And, you know, this idea that Labour somehow dominates the South Wales valleys and that the Tories dominate the rural areas is just entirely false, as anyone who looks at the actual map will see.
Well, we'll see if any more seats are going to change hands for the Senedd election here over the next few hours. For now, though, it's back to Andrea in the studio.
Ellie Pitt with all that reaction. Thank you very much indeed. Lots of back and forth there, for instance, about who was responsible for the success of the vaccine rollout in Wales. Was it the UK government and the UK Tories, or was it Welsh Labour? We've been hearing a lot about that and the fact that this has all played into it being a COVID election and the challenges which that brings. We've also heard a lot in the last hour about Conservative target seats, because we had that headline from the Vale of Clwyd where that seat went to the Tories as a Tory gain, so they will have been delighted about that. Let's talk a little bit about Plaid Cymru targets now and speak to Ellen, who is in Carmarthen for us and keeping an eye on the Llanelli seat, which is a key target seat, a real swing seat between Labour and Plaid. Ellen, how are things there with you this afternoon?
Well, Andrea, we are expecting the turnout results here for Llanelli imminently. In terms of the seat itself, well, we still don't have a real idea of how it will go. It's worth remembering that this seat has changed colours in every election except for the last one, where Labour managed to hold on to the seat. As Helen Mary Jones, Plaid Cymru's candidate, told me earlier, they've still got everything to play, but nothing in the bag. This is, of course, a key Labour seat, the type of place that Mark Drakeford will be desperate to hold on to see whether they form the next government. Whilst for Plaid, it's also their top target. Someone here will be disappointed, but like I said, the counting continues.
Ellen in Carmarthen for us this afternoon. We'll come back to you possibly before we close, before 5 o'clock. We're here till 5 o'clock. We're back on air for Wales at 6, and then we're back on air again at 9. So I think we'll have a few more results in the bag, to coin the phrase that Ellen used there, by 9 o'clock when I'm back on air with Adrian for a little bit of an update for you on Wales Decides. Let's go to a quick break now. Hello there. If you're just joining us this afternoon, you come to the Senedd election results programme with ITV Cymru Wales. We've been on air since 2 o'clock this afternoon, and we've been expecting results. They come in. We've reported to you some of the big headlines as they've emerged. The Wheel of Fortune, as we've been calling it throughout the afternoon, which is the Senedd seats, if you like, on the graphic that Adrian has by him. He's looking quite disillusioned because it hasn't quite filled up as we might have hoped. But we should remind people that usually this count would be going on through the night, but because of COVID, it's been happening throughout the day, and no one really knew, did they, how this would play out, because it's a very different scenario, as everything has been for this past year, and it means that we haven't possibly had the influx of declarations which we might have expected.
No.
But there's still lots to talk about, and you're hearing quite a lot on the ground, aren't you, via your various channels.
This is the Masters Multimedia Hub over here, and I'm still using a notebook, though, despite all that.
Of course.
Yeah, just based on what you were just saying, somebody just messaged me to say Wales. This should be called Wales Decides Now in a Minute, which I think would be a very good programme. Yeah. What I've just heard is from the Conservatives who are conceding that they haven't been able to win Labour. They haven't been able. That would be a story.
It's that time of day, isn't it?
They haven't been able to win Wrexham. So why am I telling you about something they're not winning? Because they really thought they were in with a very good chance. They have it at Westminster level, and they threw a lot of effort at it, and it looked like it was going their way. It's not now. It's a comfortable Labour hold. I'm also told that Plaid Cymru has possibly done quite well in Wrexham, which should translate into extra votes for it on the regional list. These black boxes here when we eventually get anything to put in this diagram. So another disappointment, I'm afraid, for the Conservatives. It feels like I'm giving them a lot of bad news, even without any results. Actually, it's coming the other way around. They're telling me the bad news because they are seeing how their results are piling up. They've got to take some crumbs of comfort, though, more than crumbs of comfort, because we talked about the Vale of Clwyd, which was, even though it was narrow, will be a very, much treasured result for them. Possibly still have a good chance in Brecon and Radnorshire of taking that from the Lib Dems. So there'll be a couple of gains there. There's no strong sign yet of them losing anywhere, apart from Aberconwy, which is another story. We've yet to hear on that. And we've yet to see the regional seats. So they could well do there. We don't know. Correspondingly, while we're saying that, yes, this is a very good result for Welsh Labour, which has managed to buck the trend and avoid the kind of story that we're seeing in England and in the rest of the UK for Labour at a UK level, there is a very strong chance that it won't have enough seats to form a government on its own, or if it may be able to form a government, but it'll be a minority government, and that could cause all manner of problems. So there's crumbs of hope. Do you have crumbs of hope, crumbs of optimism for the Conservatives?
We can have them this afternoon.
And some, pause for thought for Welsh Labour. It's not a clear-cut result, but it is different to what's happening elsewhere in the UK.
And I think we had the Welsh Conservatives talking earlier on. We heard from Mark Isherwood, and he was talking about Aberconwy, which is an interesting seat because actually on paper it does look like a three-way margin. He was actually talking up Plaid Cymru's chances in Aberconwy, wasn't he?
I think that's the case. I mean, I think if anyone's going to take Aberconwy, which covers the Llandudno area, then it would be Plaid Cymru. And if it did, I mean, it'd be a real crumb of comfort for Plaid Cymru, which is looking like having a bad set of results. But it would also be quite a result for the candidate there, Aaron Wynne, who is would become the youngest Senedd member, and whose partner is a candidate for another party in this election, so which makes for some interesting conversations. But yes, we're still speculating about Aberconwy, but could be an interesting one.
Where do you think we'll be at 9 o'clock tonight?
Here, in this studio.
We will be. And Jonathan Hill will be here at 6 o'clock as well. So there's plenty to join us for, and there's plenty more results to come in. Let's head to Swansea now and to Dean Thomas, who's keeping an eye on the counts there, but also some of the other seats in the general area as well, such as Bridgend, which could be quite an interesting seat. Dean, how are things looking there for you this afternoon?
Well, the way things are going, Andrea, I'll also be joining you and Adrian at 9 o'clock. Still counting here in Swansea West. Still no idea when we're going to get a declaration. We were hoping we'd have some news for you by now, but that clearly isn't the case, and I think it's going to be another couple of hours yet. OK, so let's just look around the South Wales West region and have a guess at where we could be. So Swansea East, Mike Hedges, and Swansea West, Julie James. We're expecting that to be a Labour hold. Looking elsewhere, in Neath, Jeremy Miles, we again expect that to be a Labour hold, and David Rees has a pretty healthy advantage in Aberavon. It would take some going to remove him as an MS. OK, where could it get interesting? Bridgend, as we mentioned a little earlier in the programme, currently has a Conservative MP. Whatever happens, there's going to be a new MS in Bridgend after the former First Minister Carwyn Jones stepped down. Our understanding is turnout is high and the vote for Labour is good in Bridgend, so that would be Sarah Murphy, if that was true, would be. We're looking at Gower as a potential upset for the Conservatives taking a seat off Labour. That would be Miles Langston taking it away from Rebecca Evans. So still some interest here in the South Wales West region. When we get some results, it could be at 6, it could be at 9. We'll bring them to you.
Dean, I hope you've got your sandwiches there. I think you might be there for a little while longer yet. We'll return to you when we get some more results in from Swansea. And as you say, some interesting seats in the Gower and Bridgend to come in this afternoon and this evening as well. We can speak to Rob Osborne of Sharp End fame, who is in Cardiff for us this afternoon. Always blushing. What can you tell us? Surely you've got some behind-the-scenes knowledge with all your Sharp End contacts that you've got, Rob.
I have used my Sharp End contacts, by the way, back on Monday at 10 o'clock. Thank you for that free advert. Let's use one of those famous people who are often on Sharp End, the Health Minister, Vaughan Gethin, who has literally just joined me. I haven't even said hello. I suspect you think you've won in your own seat?
I'm feeling positive about Cardiff South and Penarth, and we'll wait to see when the declaration comes.
Right, what are you hearing across Wales? Because in areas, places like the Rhondda, Llanelli, it seems like you're doing quite well.
We're having a relatively positive night, but we're still cautious about it. And you'll recall that we started this campaign with an opinion poll putting us 10 points behind the Tories. We've been up lots of ground since then, but we know there are lots of very competitive seats. We've lost one of them in the Vale of Clwyd. I'm really sad because I think Jason McLennan would have been fantastic. There are many other very tight seats to come that will be decided by small margins, so a measure of caution is required before we start declaring that this is a fantastic night for Labour. We need to see what people have chosen and how many Welsh Labour votes and seats will return to the Senedd with.
Is there a number that you have in your head that you think, at this certain point, we can go it alone as a minority government?
No, I haven't had any conversations about numbers and minority government because we're still focused on trying to win the campaign and to win the election. We haven't had all the votes cast, and of course, we do know that if we lose some seats in some parts of Wales, we may get others back on the list. I know it's complicated for voters, but we don't know what the ultimate numbers are going to be. So our focus is on the best possible performance, take nothing for granted. We then need to deal with whatever the people of Wales have decided.
What has been the factor in this election? Is it a unique COVID election and people have looked at the way you've handled things and have responded favourably? Or is it the politics of Mark Drakeford, a man of the left, and people have approached that? Places like the Rhondda, they've come back to Labour, potentially.
Well, it's more than one thing. There's been lots about the COVID crisis and our handling of it. And obviously the Conservatives throwing quite a lot of heavy artillery at Wales during this campaign. The Prime Minister has made several visits, the Chancellor too, in a way that they may not have done in the past. So after all the seats we lost in the 2019 general election, we know that we started this in a difficult place. Just 15 months ago, many parts of Wales voted Tory for the first time. So let's see what the results are, and let's be positive about our prospects and, most importantly, the future for Wales.
Vaughan Gethin, Health Minister, thanks for joining us. We will see whether he comes back, Mark Drakeford and all the others in Cardiff, in the next few hours.
We will, Rob. Thank you. And I'm going to speak to Adrian straight away now, because I think we've got to the moment where we can summarise the afternoon, haven't we? And that is your job, I'm pleased to say.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Well, let me take you into my detailed map, which... What have we been doing for the last 3 hours? You know, some people on Twitter and other places have been going on to us for speculating, as if we're making this up. But no, we haven't had any results. But I'm sorry, I'm ranting now, aren't we? No, we haven't had any results, or we haven't had many results. But what I'm reporting back to you, and what our reporters are telling us, are what the parties are saying to us. So we're reflecting the story that is going on, and the story that is going on, which we, you know, if in due course, by 10 o'clock, we should have some more pretty colours in this diagram. We're going to show exactly how the constituencies have changed or not changed. They're the smaller areas around where you live locally, and how these regions, which are the bigger areas, and which are elected in a different way, how those have translated into seats in the Senedd, and what that means in terms for the next Welsh government, and whether anybody actually gets to this middle point, which is 30 seats at least, in order to be able to form a government without having to do some kind of deal. So, having said all that, where we are at the moment is that Labour, which is looking on course to be the biggest party, which won't be a surprise. That's been happening for many, many years now, and it's what polls were showing. The polls were also showing that Labour was going to have a fairly ropey day. I've got to remember where we are. It's not. But it's not popping the champagne corks just yet, because both the electoral system and the various other things that are going on could well mean that Mark Drakeford won't have enough seats to form a government. So it's not all positive for Labour. The Conservatives, the polls were showing them as having some kind of surge. They're not. They have got some bright spots, and they have got some hopes in the regional seats, but it hasn't been what they were looking for. And for Plaid Cymru too, not so great. But it's not a complete collapse, at least not yet. But we don't know what these regions are saying, and that could mean all sorts of small parties. It could mean good or bad news for the big parties, and it could mean good or bad news for whoever wants to form a government. So that's a cliffhanger.
And if you really like your cliffhangers, you might even want to return tomorrow, because some of those regional seats, we might get the results tomorrow, Adrian. So we've really whetted your appetites this afternoon, I think. That brings us to a close. If you've stuck with us for 3 hours, then, well, congratulations, and thanks for being with us as the Senedd election story of 2021 unfolded, albeit a little bit more slowly than we might have predicted. It is still unfolding, and there'll be updates at itv.com/Wales with Jonathan Hill on Wales at 6, and Adrian and myself will be back, oh yes, at 9 p.m. with a special Wales